Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a live stream here with, the usual all things vegan, awesome live stream where I bring the most amazing guests in the world. And today, my most amazing guest is Tofu Dog. Oh, pointing that way. Tofu Dog. So, yes, Tofu Dog, tell me, who are you in case somebody doesn't know who you are?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody who is here. I go by Tofu Dog. That's my channel name, and I do vegan activism, outreach, video essays, research kind of stuff, and I also branch out into procreative ethics. So basically, kind of talking about why people have kids and all kinds of very interesting topics that come up kind of around that field of conversation. But I would say mainly on the vegan side of things, like I said, I do those like the research things, the outreach, and I'm just constantly trying to get better at that. Still very new to it. So, yeah, just trying to get better at being active for the animals and playing a part in the community. I also do live streams. I forgot about those. So we've been doing Stardew Valley live streams and also some art streams and looking to branch out in the streaming world as well.
Nice. Nice. So, okay, right off the bat, I'm going to hit you with a hard question. Which one,
Okay.
if you could only choose one to speak
Mm-hmm.
about,
Mm-hmm.
would you choose to speak about veganism, about antinatalism, about procreative, what did you call it again?
Ethics, procreative ethics.
Procreative ethics. Okay, thank you.
I would
Uh,
choose veganism.
Veganism.
Um,
Okay, interesting.
yeah, definitely. I think that it is the most important issue that we have today, and I think that procreative ethics follows that pretty closely as well. But yeah, the animals are easily the most oppressed group of individuals, and yeah, it's really catastrophic. But like I said, procreative ethics kind of slots into that really nicely, and I also think it's extremely important and just impacts so many aspects of people's lives, and it does also impact veganism as well and animals in all kinds of ways. So I think it's also a really important topic that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it deserves. So I hope to um, do justice to both topics and just try and have those important conversations.
Love it. I mean, I think everybody in the chat loves you for saying that, so that's perfect. Yeah, we're all in agreement. I think veganism is one of those. I mean, it's also just that I don't think we have enough animal rights
Mm-hmm.
activists anyway in this world. Not sure
Mm-hmm.
how many activists speaking about procreative ethics though. Like, are there a lot of people speaking about this? Because I haven't seen like how you do it when you go on the street and you speak to people like this.
Yeah, so from what I can tell, there's not that many. I've been sort of in the vegan sphere a little bit longer than I've been in the procreative ethics sphere. And there really is not a lot of conversation happening around that, which is part of what makes it so incredibly interesting to me. There's like this entire undiscovered world of ethics and behaviors that are pretty unexplored by the average person. And in a similar way to a lot of people describe this like awakening when it comes to recognizing how we treat animals and, the way that they've been objectified and the way it's so normalized in our society. A very similar thing is actually happening with procreation and reproduction and having kids. It's a very similar mode of people just fall into these behaviors that they see modeled by their friends, their family, society at large, in media, and people don't really stop to question it. So I find that there's a very significant overlap between these two like realms.
Is the overlap more within the idea that they're things that people don't usually think about, or and that they know that they have options, or is the overlap more towards the victim side? I mean, actually, in procreative ethics, are there victims?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting topic, and I'm still kind of working it out on my own because you'll notice I'm using the word procreative ethics instead of antinatalism.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very long answer that I'm like of why I'm doing that, which I'm not entirely clear. Like, I'm clear on it internally. It's just figuring out how to express that. That's been very challenging because it's a very, very messy subject. And so the victims, part of the reason for that is because I've reframed it from the antinatalist perspective into like I realized what it was bothering me is that when people say, "Oh, I want to have kids," it's I want to have kids. And we're not looking at the child's perspective most of the time. I'm not saying that people are being
I'm
I'm
loving
not
this.
so I'm not saying that, um like I understand that most parents have only the best in mind for their children, and none of this is shade at parents at all, or people who want kids even, right? It's all about having open discussions about it. But what I really started to realize is I learned about this concept called childism, and basically the way that we view children and our entitlement to other people through reproduction is very similar to the way that we view our entitlement to non-human animals. So, they say like, oh, I want kids. I want the experience of being a parent, like I want to have a child so that they can maybe do good in the world. There's a lot of overlap in the entitlement to others that we feel. And I started thinking about how kids are really actually an oppressed class of individuals, obviously to a completely different scale than animals. I'm not trying to make that comparison. But yeah, so I shifted away from just this very philosophical angle of things, which is like, is it wrong to create sentient life? Which is an extremely interesting question. And I've come up with the answer, being no. But there's a whole other angle that I think is even more interesting, more dynamic, and more applicable to like normal people. And that is, what is the role of children in society and what are we actually doing with procreation?
I love that. Okay, well, I just want to go deep into that, but before we go deep into that, I prepared some nice questions.
Okay.
And by the way, usually just to get things rolling, but we already got things rolling. But I'm going to ask you anyway, just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
I usually ask a couple of like easy questions out of the bat, just
Sounds good.
to get the type of person that you are. We're judging you right now.
I'm here for it. Do your worst.
Okay. Okay, coffee person or tea person?
Challenging question. I would say I'm 50-50. I actually am not much of a caffeine person at all. But I enjoy them equally. Like I love black tea with like a little too much sugar, but I also love an iced decaf mocha. So I'm really basically very infrequently, but it's a very 50-50 when I do go for it.
But that's already caffeine. What do you mean? Black tea has a lot of caffeine.
Well, but I do that like maybe a couple times a month.
Okay. Oh, a couple of times a month. Is that like
Yeah.
a special occasion? How do you choose when you do that?
It's just when I feel it, like I really want it. It's not because of the caffeine, it's actually because of the flavor of both of those things. Like I actually get really jittery when I drink caffeine, and it has a negative effect on my body. Like I don't really feel that good after I drink it. So it's really, I just do it for the flavor, and I have to make sure I've eaten enough beforehand. Otherwise my day gets a little bit ruined. So
Oh, I get that. I'm the same. I also get extremely jittery on coffee, and I start saying random stupid stuff because it's too jittery. So
I actually sipped a little bit of my partner's coffee this morning, so I'm actually having a tiny bit of that jitteriness.
Okay.
To try and keep it
Okay.
together.
If you need to do jumping jacks, I'll do them with you. It's all
I
good.
already had some time on a trampoline this morning, so I hope that I've got some of the energy out.
Oh, that's cool. You have a trampoline like in a residential area where you live in, or where?
It's a small one. Yeah, it's one of those. It's like, I don't know, like 4 feet across. It's in the living room. It's awesome. Highly recommend.
4 feet is
Like a meter?
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's a pretty decent
It is.
trampoline. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay.
It is. Put on some music. It's amazing.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. Sounds like a good time. Love it.
Honestly,
Okay.
it is.
Why did you want to grow up? What did you want to be when you were a child? What you want to grow up as when you were a child? I guess. Well, a weird question. Yeah.
There are two main answers, and when I was like, and I kind of went back and forth between the two of them, and those are artist and lawyer. And the interesting thing is, like, somebody pointed out to me, we were talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. This was like a couple of months ago, and I said I wanted to be an artist or a lawyer. And she said to me, you kind of are an artist lawyer. Like doing outreach and YouTube videos, you're kind of combining two of those elements, which I thought was pretty neat. So Mhm.
Can I ask, why did you want to be a lawyer? I understand as an artist. Was it because you're talented? Because I've in case people who haven't seen your videos, you're pretty talented at drawing. Is it because you're talented that you want to be an artist, or why did you want to be an artist, and why did you want to be a lawyer?
Yeah, so with the art thing, my parents put me into art classes pretty early on. So I think I was just very sort of creative. I really enjoyed it. It was like my relationship with art is pretty complex, which I think is true for a lot of people, where it's like the motivation for it is kind of hard, but I always really enjoyed the challenge and the satisfaction of just creating something that's beautiful and meaningful, and that you really like, it's a manifestation of all this energy and time and effort, was really, really satisfying. And that always really appealed to me, and I did have like an inclination towards it for sure. Um,
Okay.
and when it comes to, did you want to mention
No, I just thought I put it out there. When you
best
see
chicken
it,
from
you see it.
memory? Yeah, so I do draw from memory on stream. I've done it 3 times so far. We've done a chicken, a pig, and the first one. Why can I not remember? Anyways, thank you, Vegan Postmortem. Vegan Postmortem made a beautiful pig. But the lawyer side of things is because I was always very interested in discussing and arguing, but not in like aggressive sense. I think I had a little bit more of that
Mm.
aggression when I was younger. You know, I just had this passion for like really getting to the bottom of stuff and just this very intense curiosity for everything. And it's just like I always wanted to figure out like why are we doing this? You know, why does this happen? And just like examining the evidence and like that kind of thing, which I carry that energy to this day. I think that's how I ended up, you know, in veganism, being so interested in procreative ethics, and, you know, why I enjoy street activism and engaging with these like interesting topics in a very in-depth way.
Oh, nice. That's a pretty good explanation. I think I can relate to a lot of what you said, except for the art stuff. I was yeah, not very good at it. What's your go-to karaoke song?
I have actually only ever done karaoke one time, and it was at a house party. And I was singing into the microphone with my partner because I am incredibly shy when it comes to stuff like that. Um, so I don't actually have one. We did Linger by the Cranberries, which was a solid choice. I don't know that I would do it again on my own. If I did it again on my own, there are a few songs I know really well. Right now they're Chapel Roan, but there's also a few like classic Maroon 5 songs that I feel like for some reason I can really hit those notes, which is funny because I really can't sing. So maybe an old Maroon 5 song just because they're easy.
I mean, once an artist, always an artist. So you never know, right?
You know,
Maybe the skills, maybe they translate into music also.
the funny thing is I was in a band in high school and I did actually sing on a stage like one
What the hell
time.
are you talking about? Of
It
course
was
you can hit notes and stuff then.
no, the thing is though, it was incredibly bold because I genuinely couldn't sing. We just didn't have a singer, but we wanted to perform. So I was like, well, I guess I can just sing this song. And I did such a bad job that somebody actually offered me their card for singing lessons afterwards. But I'm still proud of myself for doing it. But that's actually how I know for certain that I can't sing, because I've seen video evidence.
Okay. We're gonna have to find that video at some point.
It does
Uh,
exist. You will never get it out of me.
okay. Do you arrive early, on time, or late for events?
I definitely not early. I do my best to be early when it's something really important, which makes it sound like I don't think that every event I go to is really important, which is not the case. I really do value people's time, but when I say late, I'm talking 2 to 3 minutes. I'm consistently either right on time or 2 to 3 minutes late. I do, like, for example, for the stream, I tried to be here 10 minutes early. For my streams, I also try to be there 10 minutes early. So it's something I'm working on.
No, that's not late at all. That's actually pretty good. Nice. Okay, and I'll just shoot one more question. Are you a morning person or an evening person?
Oh, I'm an evening person, which is unfortunate. For some reason, I just think I would love to be a morning person, but I'm just not. Like, I actually feel physically ill when I see the sunrise. Like my body rejects it. I hate the
Are you-
freaking sunrise.
So what happens during winter? Do you just like wake up after the like
Yes,
is
I.
it, you're pretty far north, right? You're northwest US, right? So that
Yep.
I would imagine that the sun rises pretty late during winters.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. I do my best to arrange my life so that I can wake up after the sun rises, which I'm not always so lucky. But I actually do try and get around that because I really feel miserable when I see the freaking sunrise. If I wake up before the sun, it's like I feel it in my body. It's just like something is wrong.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I guess I kind of get the sentiment, right? Because you wake up when it's dark and it kind of feels you get that drowsiness. I kind of get that. Okay. Oh, one more. I remember asking Justin from Debug Your Brain this one. What is your phone wallpaper right now?
It is a picture of my partner holding a cat.
Oh, okay. That's good. Okay. Love it. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Now let's get into the good stuff. This was also pretty good. Okay. So how long have you been vegan?
Hmm.
What got you to go vegan, and which definition of veganism do you subscribe to?
So when I went vegan is like a little bit hard to pinpoint exactly. It was, I'm pretty sure, the second half of 2021. But the reason I say kind of hard to pinpoint is because I was vegetarian since I was 14. And I know that those are
Hmm.
very different things. You don't need to, no, that doesn't need to be explained to me. But the thing is, I was vegetarian for ethical reasons, which we all know how ridiculous that sounds to everybody who's here. But I was genuinely convinced of the sort of, like, I was very pro animal, I guess, even at the time. I was just uneducated about the extent to which, animal exploitation was happening and the extent to which I was contributing to it. And even by, I thought like, oh, by not eating meat, that's the only thing that really requires the animal to be killed. So, in my mind, I had these ideas about, oh, like there's like a way to get eggs that doesn't actually cause harm or whatever. And so because I thought veganism was about, helping animals, reducing harm, I thought I'm already doing so much, and it's like if I occasionally eat like a croissant that has some butter in it or whatever, how bad is that really? Which is now completely wrong. But the thing is, like, I had tried, so like I had cut very, very extensively for a while, and I really believed that what I was doing was helping animals. But the moment at which I realized that I was not doing enough would have been like that second half of 2021 when I was dating my partner. I think we were almost a year into the relationship, and he was not even a vegetarian. And I just thought like it was getting serious around that time. And I said, I'm really, really not comfortable being with somebody who, eats animals. And so I had heard about Dominion, and I said, okay, like let's watch Dominion together. And of course, from that moment on, it was like, oh, this is terrible. I can't believe I've been contributing to this. I need to take this way more seriously. And he was thankfully also on board, and we are still together, and we are both vegan.
Oh, that's awesome. It's
Hmm.
awesome that both so Dominion got you vegan, both you and him.
It did, yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I sometimes I just wonder the people who made these documentaries if they realize just how much of an impact these documentaries have had in the world. So
Yeah. I mean, in addition to Dominion, I was also really started, like, pretty immediately after that, I started to really delve into, like, Earthling Ed, some of those talks, and, like, Gary Yourofsky's speech, all the classics, of course. And I just started, like, really educating myself because, again, I had that spirit of being on the side of the animals, right? Like for even longer. So I just felt like it really reignited this. And like I was kind of hesitant about really getting into a lot of like the activism stuff because I just knew that I was going to like lose myself in it. Like I part of me really selfishly wanted to keep one foot in the normal world, right? And not experience that alienation. But I saw the footage, I got educated, and I thought like this is really like I need to do something about this. I can't, I can't live in a world that's like this.
no, I can relate that. And what definition of veganism do you subscribe to now? I'm guessing right
Yeah.
when we started, we all kind of had one way, but what is it now for you?
Yeah. So for me now, it is the principle that people should live without exploiting animals. So basically, ending human exploitation and use of non-human animals.
Okay, I like that. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, because that
so to be
way
noted.
it's like it's inclusive, right? And it recognizes that there are everybody has to draw the line for themselves, right? Like we live in a world that is inherently built on animal use and exploitation, and it's impossible to
Yeah.
live entirely without it. So I think that that definition is going to be the best one for getting people to understand that veganism is a mindset and not about a perfect set of practices, which is impossible.
Yeah, and I usually like to add also just slaughter, exploitation or slaughter, because I feel like
Mm.
maybe when you're hunting, you're not really exploiting animals. You're just
Yeah, that's where
hunting.
the use one, like the use comes in because you're using them, I guess, in that sense for
Fair.
entertainment or for whatever like product you're getting from their body. But yeah, I
Mm.
think that the addition of slaughter is good. But for me, use
Or
kind of
maybe
fills that gap.
fair enough. Or maybe oppression. Oppression is a really good word.
Hmm.
Okay. What is why tofu dog? What's the significance between tofu dog?
Okay, there is absolutely none. So what happened is I went through, watching all the documentaries, educating myself, doing my reading, and I just I like again that lawyer side of me and the creative side of me. I was like, I want to do something, because I was bursting with this energy to talk to people about this. I was just literally like gonna explode.
Yeah,
And so my
we all know
partner,
how that's like, I guess.
yeah. And so my partner was like, why don't you make a YouTube channel? And he's in, he has a bit of a background in video production, so the equipment was already there. And he had the vision before I did. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm super shy. I hate being photographed. I'm so bad in front of a camera. But he said, no, you have to do this. So I was like, okay, I don't have an excuse as to why I shouldn't be doing this. And so I started writing these videos, like the first 5 videos that are on my channel. I was like, hey, I'm just gonna make 5 videos, see how it goes. And I had the videos and no channel. And I agonized over the channel name for 6 months, maybe, before I actually made the channel, because I am super, super, super bad at naming things. Like a trivia team couldn't do it. Band couldn't do it. Like channel name couldn't do it. And so I was actually making an account for a different website at like 1 a.m. And I just literally put the words tofu and dog into the username thing. And then I made the account, and then I looked at it, and then I looked at it again, and then I went into the kitchen at 1 a.m. and I was like, hey, what do you think of tofu dog? And he was so tired of me endlessly agonizing over names that he was like, that is your channel name. I do not care. I don't want to hear another word about this. And I kind of figured it hit the mark because it doesn't have the word vegan in it, which for me, because I wanted to talk about other things, I already had the idea in the back of my mind. I was like, okay. And it's kind of playful, which I also like. And it's also a little bit of a brand. So I kind of think of it as the channel name and not really my name. But of course, since I'm not super open about my name right now, people just started calling me it, which is kind of like a funny side effect of that. So that's
Yeah,
that
I mean,
story.
so tofu dog is just like a mixture of two words. It's not
Yeah.
a dog that eats tofu or a dog made of tofu, or
No, but that is my logo.
that is your logo, a dog made of tofu. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good logo. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, you already answered some of these questions. What did you find anything hard about becoming vegan, or what was the hardest part about becoming vegan for you?
So I think that there are several answers to that. And the hardest part, I think, is I hate to say it, but the necessary alienation that comes from friends, family, and loved ones. The hardest part is also just recognizing that, that's the selfish hardest part, right? And then the other hard part is just recognizing the extreme degree to which animals are exploited, used, objectified, and just observing that people around you are totally fine with that. Or, they're either fine with it or they don't care enough.
Yeah.
It's just you sort of, I used to not think this. I used to think, oh, well, you can just, being, rejecting animal exploitation is something you can do and have a pretty normal life. And I'm starting to question how true that is. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. In fact, it's the opposite. But yeah, definitely just seeing the extent to which it is and living with that is super shitty. I mean, there's no really other way to say that. And then feeling you want to do your best, and what that even is not always clear, right? And so yeah, just those two things are very challenging. And of course, the silly answer is that I was legitimately addicted to Nutella.
Well, now there's vegan Nutella, right? So perfect.
Not here. But I did find a version that is from a different brand, and it is so good. I screw Nutella. I screw those guys.
But just put peanut butter, cocoa, and some sweetener.
It's not the same. It's not the same. But it's okay. I've filled the hole. I'm fine.
Okay, love it. So I actually had a follow-up question to this one. Do you think that vegans have the moral obligation to be animal rights activists then?
I haven't given this one too much thought. It's really hard to say because everybody's in a very different situation, right? There may be situations in which they really can't. I think activism can take all kinds of forms. I have a hard time imagining knowing what's happening to animals and not feeling like I really need to do at least something about it. So it's hard to say because I would imagine that if you're really clued in to everything that's going on, you would feel a drive to do something, right? So
Yeah.
I don't really know how to answer that question because to me, one follows from the other pretty naturally.
That's a pretty good answer. I would I would agree with you. It's and of course activism doesn't necessarily have to mean going on the street and speaking out to people, but
Yeah,
there's many
absolutely.
forms of activism, right?
Totally.
Uh, I saw a good question. What do you prefer to be called if tofu if you said that people call you tofu dough from your channel name, but that's your channel name. What do you prefer to be called?
You can call me that. I am so tempted to just share my name. Like I was initially kind of keeping it for privacy purposes just cuz it like was scary to get online initially, to like put yourself out there and like my name kind of. And the thing is like I've actually shared my name in a couple of places. So now I kind of feel like I'm keeping it just as a secret for fun so that I can reveal
Okay.
it very dramatically one day, but you can just call me Tofu Dog, and I'm sorry about that. I know it's dumb, okay? But we're in this dumb ship together until one day it feels right. And then we can start
Okay.
calling me my name.
So when you say that some people have seen your name, are people
Yeah.
in like that watch your channel that have seen your name?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so does anybody in the chat know her name? You don't have to say it. I'm just curious if anybody in the chat knows your name. Um,
That's funny.
okay. Were you nervous the first time you did outreach? How often do you do outreach? I'm now kind of transitioning into outreach. So,
Sure.
um, how does outreach feel to you? Do you go in? Is there a calling when you go, or do you just have a schedule behind it? How do you project it, the activism or outreach?
Yeah, so the first few times I was so nervous, I put it off. So like I would make excuses. I was like, "Oh, well I need to make a sign." And then I would make my sign. I was like, "Well, the sign has to be better." And then I was like, "Well, I don't know how, the camera." And then I was like, "Well, I don't know really how to use these microphones." And so I just had to really lower the barrier of entry as much as possible for myself, which is why you see me using my phone in my outreach videos for now, which I will be changing, don't worry. I have a setup and I'm much more confident with it now. But I was absolutely terrified. Like, despite the fact that I have all this energy to talk to people, I still was. It's a weird thing to do. It is a weird thing to set yourself up on a street with a sign that people will likely react, to in a hostile manner, and then try and have a conversation with them, especially because I hadn't done a lot of research about behavior change or how to have these conversations. Like, I had definitely learned about like how to do outreach, and I was pretty confident that I'm a reasonable person who's not going to do a god awful job, right? Um, but since then, I've done so much reading and learning that I've gotten much more confident with it. And then also, this idea of like the worst you do is still better than if that person had never encountered veganism that day. And I don't think that that's always true, but I think it is often true. And that really helped me. And then once I started doing it, it's honestly fun. It's um, like fun kind of feels like sometimes the wrong word, right? Because it's like a very serious topic that we're talking about. But I do think that there is an element of not really enjoyment, but maybe satisfaction is the better word of, when you get somebody who's really curious and you're able to engage them about something, there is a sense of like productivity is not the right word either, but I think satisfaction is the closest that I can get to describing the feeling. And that kicks in pretty quickly for me. And in terms of schedule, the first few times I did have to sort of schedule myself. I moved and I actually had surgery in May, and so I was kind of like, on resting and recovering for a while, and I haven't gotten out here yet, but I'm going next week because I was kind of trying to figure out good places, and it was again I kind of got nervous about being in a new place, new
Yeah, I get that.
variables got in the way, and but yeah, so that'll be next week that I'm doing it again, for the first time in this new place. So that's gonna be awesome. I'm like literally bursting to do it too. Like the thing is, like for a while I was like, oh, I'm kind of nervous, and now I'm like, get me out there. Like I need to put all the stuff I've learned to use. Like I'm really itching to have these conversations with people at this point.
I get that. For me, it's a weird combination that I'm like, yeah, I can hardly wait to go there, but as the time goes by, I get nervous
Yeah.
and I'm like, just go, just go, just go. Sometimes I just approach it with like, don't think about it, just go. And once you're there, you figure it out there. That doesn't really matter.
Yes.
So
That's how I did it too. I was like, I'm gonna just go there, and if I hate it, I can go home. And I was like, no
Exactly.
pressure, but all I have to do is like, those people who say like, I'm not going to the gym, I'm just going to drive to the gym parking lot. I've never done that, but it feels like a sort of similar idea.
Okay, that's cool. Do you gym? Is that no? Okay, okay. I was
No,
curious. Yeah.
I do like, no gym for me. I wish maybe
Oh.
one day, but I
Okay.
know.
Oh, Linda said a good word. Is it accomplishment?
Um, I think that accomplishment is close too. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it so? Do you get this feeling when the person is interacting with the conversation, or when they understand veganism, or do you also get this feeling when you have these? I don't want to call them necessarily trolls, but like people who are a bit blockheaded, or like they just don't want to engage with the idea of veganism, with the idea that animals are just like us, then they deserve freedom and rights and all that stuff.
Yeah. I think that even in those conversations, I try not to let those go on for too long. I've had a problem getting out of conversations, right? Because it's dumb. Everybody knows this feeling of like you don't want to end it because then they think they're winning, but you know that it's not about winning, it's a whole thing. But I find that even in those conversations, even if they're responding in a certain way in the moment, I try to picture, somebody's like awakening to animal exploitation as, like a tree, and then like you're swinging an axe at the tree and you're just one axe swing, right? And it's like, maybe they'll see a YouTube video, or they'll see, I don't know, a poster, or they'll listen to a friend or a family member talk about, animal exploitation or veganism or something. And regardless, like I'm swinging the axe in that conversation no matter what. Some axe swings are better than others. You're going to hit the
Yeah.
tree at a different point. You're just one like point, one data point basically for that person, in their
Yeah, and they're
recognition.
full, and the
Exactly.
fullness of the tree. Yeah, I get
Exactly.
that.
And some trees are skinny. Sometimes it just needs one or two axe swings. Some trees are very thick and it's going to be several and it's going to feel like you didn't do anything. But I try and use that visual to remain optimistic, even when things don't feel that good in the moment, which sometimes it still feels really shitty, but it
It's
is what
very
it is.
interesting. And like, what is a good conversation to you? Like, how do you classify a conversation as good or bad? And yeah, let's start with that. Like, what exactly is a good outreach conversation?
Like I said, I'm still relatively new to this, so I'm still, I think, figuring out exactly what that means. But at this point, I would say that what feels good to me is when I feel like that person is able to personally connect, and demonstrate understanding of, what veganism is, how they're participating in animal exploitation, and also the seriousness. If I can see that they've made some kind of shift in their perspective towards their relationship with animals, and that they come away with an accurate understanding of what veganism is, and the ways, and the fact that they can stop supporting, animal use and exploitation. And if I feel like you can see it in their eyes sometimes, but I don't know. I'm not super sure on that one. But basically, when I can see that they've taken a genuine personal interest and I've conveyed like accurate, useful information.
Do you think there's any value in the conversations where you don't really feel that about the person, but you still hold them accountable?
I think so. I think it comes back to that like tree axe scenario, right? Like, not you can't control how every conversation goes, and I'm certainly not perfect. Nobody's perfect. It's impossible to have perfect conversations, but I
Yeah.
do think that at the very least, what you're doing is giving them a new perspective, no matter what. And people may be responding in one way in person, but when they go home and they sit on that information, they may be able to, because they're defending themselves a little bit, right? Like I get it to a certain degree. You don't want to admit that you've been doing something wrong. It's like it's very vulnerable to basically say to a stranger on the street, oh, I've been committing an atrocity. Like, I think that's hard for a lot of people. So I like to think that there's still value in that, no matter what. You're still hopefully having a conversation with somebody, showing them that vegans are out there, people who oppose animal exploitation are out there, and it's just one little step, no matter what.
Um, I mean, based on what I saw in your videos, I feel like people usually connect with you pretty well because you're very respectful, and you have a very non-confrontational way of talking about things. I feel like even if sometimes they do come off like I think there was this last video with the guy from the university where it came off as like he was contradicting you, or he started being a bit debatey about it. But do you get a lot of these types of conversations, or do you get more of this nice conversation? Because I feel like since you are so welcoming, is welcoming a good word? I don't know, like I feel like you're you have an approach where people get a raise their don't raise their arms, they just go, they lower their defenses a bit and actually have a good conversations with them. And that's also because I feel like you don't just hold them accountable, but you actually have conversations with them about veganism and about their beliefs. So do you get other types of people?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty mixed. I think it really depends more on uh, I don't want to say it depends more on the other person, right? Because the energy that you bring is obviously incredibly important. But I would say there's just like a mix. I do think that who the other person sort of inherently is and where they're at plays a really big role in that. And I think that the reason that I have this approach is because I try to give the benefit of the doubt, right? Like, not in the sense that, like, oh, you know, what you're doing is not bad, but just like, I'm going to believe that when the person realizes what they're doing, that they're going to be genuinely interested in changing, right? Because I just believe that that's the most productive way to have one-on-one conversations with people about this topic, right? And when I look back at how I was, I just think about what would have worked for me, right? And I think that you can be very firm, you can be very direct and specific while still having and not like an open mind, right? But just empathy and like understanding for the fact that the person you're talking to has been brainwashed. You know, they may have like varying levels of investment, fear. Maybe they've been told certain things. Maybe they have like a very, very contentious family. Maybe they've genuinely never met an animal before. I don't know. There's all kinds of reasons, right? But
Oh, yeah.
I think that there's this metaphor in the book, like how minds change. And it's like, you have to pull a string, right? You can't push a string, like if you want to move the string. So I kind of think about it as like pull, and you want to like pull out of them, like their understanding and help them work through it. But you know, that's just on the one-on-one level of things, and that's just also what works for me. I don't like fighting with people in the street. I don't
Do
think I
you
would go do it often if that's what it came to.
do you think the attitude matters? I'm starting to believe like because I myself like I mean there's obviously some attitude matters. Like if you're just gonna come out and say, "Hey, you piece of shit, how dare you do this to animals," or something like that, it's gonna be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you're just like maybe a little bit more passionate or a little bit more intense, just because that's just who you are, that's just how you speak about animals. Maybe you're just not too, I don't know, too calm about stuff. Do you think that matters? Or because lately I've just been thinking that the reality is kind of no matter how you send the message, that person will always be, as you put it, that thick
Mm-hmm.
trunk, just thick trunk,
Yeah.
or of a tree, or a less thick, or I don't know, thinner trunk. And as you said, you're just swinging an axe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think any of this really matters? Do you think like, because I'm trying to, the reason why I like to have these conversations with other fellow activists is also because I kind of want to see what role do you think an activist plays in all this when we come to a person. Do you think we're informing them? Do you think we're trying to get them to change? Do you think we're planting seeds? What, like, how do you see your role in this whole conversation with a person about veganism?
Yeah. So I think that that's a very, very complex question, and I've been absorbing so much of that information lately. Like, I've been having tons of discussions with people about it, absorbing, just trying to get, you know, more clear in my messaging and really figure out what it is that I'm doing here, right? Like, I want to make sure that I'm being very intentional and I'm doing the, you know, the best for animals that I can be doing. And I think that something that stands out to me from, I'm going to mention the book How Minds Change again, was this part about group psychology. And people identify very strongly with groups. And a big part of what
Interesting.
I think that I'm doing with veganism is I'm showing them that we're not so different. Like, we're obviously very different in, you know, the fact that, you know, vegans don't exploit animals and non-vegans do exploit animals, right? But like, I think the point
Yeah.
is that I used to not be vegan. I now reject animal exploitation and am vegan, and they can be like me. I think that that's part of what I want to convey in that situation. Like I want them to think not like, oh, I met a vegan, it's I met a person who rejects animal exploitation, and they made me think that I should also, they made it clear how important it is that I also should reject animal exploitation, and try to not make that us and them too strong. But I mean, like I said, I'm still very new to this. I'm still figuring it all out, and I'm constantly learning. So these are just my intuitions based off of the little experience that I have here.
No, I mean, you keep saying little experience. How long have you
Mhm.
been doing activism for?
Since January. So
That's a
that's,
lot. What do you mean?
but
That's
I haven't gone, like, there was a big gap in the middle where I haven't done it. So
okay.
it's yeah. So it's still, I need to do more because then I think that it'll become clear to me too
That's cool.
how I like
Yeah,
to
I
show
mean,
up.
what I feel like every person can do activism. I feel every
Hmm.
every interaction is valuable, and I really like that that comparison with swinging an axe, because I guess maybe like the angle that you swing the axe
Hmm.
at could matter, but I don't think you're ever gonna make the tree like thicker. You're always gonna
Yeah.
swing an axe. The thick, you're
Yeah.
always on your way to putting down that tree, right? So that's a good point. And I actually wrote down this idea of identifying with groups, because
Mhm.
interesting that it took you way less time than me to notice that. Reality is that people care more about their belonging to a group than about anything else, really. Like I believe that people would even eat their legs if they would feel like they belong to a group of people that eats their own legs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can be very clear about like, here is this other group, but you can join this group. Like I want that to be very, like, I'm trying to not push them further into their camp. I think it's a very fine balance in those conversations to make them feel welcome, but also accountable to their actions, and make it clear why they need to change their group allegiance. And yeah, I complex. Definitely not
Yeah,
easy.
it is complex because, like, do we want them to change their group? That's the thing, right? Like, I feel like that's the difficult part about it, because, like, imagine coming to somebody and telling them, hey, your friends are not good for you. You need different friends. Like, it's even more difficult than telling them that
Mm-hmm.
something they're doing is not okay. So mm, and by the way, to this, do you think that we should then be focused more on the idea of community, the community that veganism has, or the idea that you'll still have a community even if you belong vegan, people will still accept you as vegan? Like, I don't think a lot of activists speak about that when we do outreach, but do you think that's an important part that we should be approaching?
Yeah, I think that's something I've observed is when people stop being vegan, my impression is that it's because they just sort of fell out of touch with the community. Like, we're all surrounded by people who engage in animal exploitation. They're eating them, wearing them, using them as entertainment. And I think when you let yourself, I mean, I'm like, when people distance themselves from that, some people obviously are capable of it, but I think that what I've seen, people who stop being vegan, they stopped being in touch with veganism and engaging in, this media, and, recognizing why it's important, right? They just kind of drift away, and they're sort of like, I don't know why I'm only coming with the word seduced, but they're like seduced back into this normal world, right?
I mean,
And then, mhm,
it's a good word. It's a good word
mhm.
because it's it's so much easier to be normal. It's
Yeah, exactly. And so I do think that community building is a huge part of it. That's a big reason why my streams are kind of silly right now, like just Stardew Valley. And it's also that like approachability, right? Like I would hope that anybody can tune into the Stardew Valley stream and just see a bunch of normal people like having fun playing a game. And I think that that can also be community building, because I think that it can be really hard. It's very important, but really hard to stay in tune with the amount and degree of exploitation and to really watch that, right? So I think that it's really important that there's a way for people to stay connected with the community that isn't always so heavy, because I think that's what leads to burnout. And I think burnout is really, really bad for veganism, animals, the community. And I think that having lighter ways to be in touch with that, in touch with those values, without it being like I'm watching individuals get murdered, right? I think that that's important, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will take advantage of this opportunity. Everybody who's watching this, as was in the chat, don't forget to subscribe to Tofu Dog. I mean, I'll put her thing here.
Thank you.
She does have a good community, and I really like endorsing communities. So Tofu Dog for you is her YouTube handle, and yeah, go there, show him some love, show her some love.
Thank you. Yes, we do
Okay.
have fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I come to your streams also, because it's fun, like
Thank
especially when
you.
drawing from memory parts, when you do these streams where drawing from memory, I'm like, it's so I don't know how you do it without, like, because I'm so tempted to I would say cheat, like look, but yeah, it also kind of sheds a light on how we see animals in a sense, right? When you draw from memory, which is
Yeah.
which is a it's a big deal of, because like chickens, uh, I remember tuning into your stream and then just googling a picture of a chicken, and I'm like, oh my god, I never realized just how complex these chickens are. And I had a pet chicken, and I had a
Wow.
pet chicken, I didn't realize. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. I hadn't even really considered it from that angle, but it was something that was coming up for me too. It's like, oh, the first one I did was a duck, and I was trying to draw this duck from memory, and then I was like, how hard have I really looked at a duck, Like, it really does like bring up kind of like a philosophical side of things too, in addition to just being like an interesting experiment kind of thing.
I saw Ulf saying, Ulf, thank you so much for the donation. Ulf is a musician.
Very cool.
He asks you, Tofu Dog, thoughts on British short hairs?
I'm gonna need further clarification on what a British short hair is.
It's the same thing, guy. As I think it's a breed of cat.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I I don't think that we should be breeding cats. That's my thoughts. I'm sure they're lovely as individuals. I'm sure some of them aren't. I don't know.
That's a good point. Let's talk about pets. What's your take on pets?
Yeah, my take on pets is complex. I mean, it's not. It's animals shouldn't be, exploited and used as pets for entertainment or human comfort or anything like that. It's wrong. They suffer immensely. I mean, it's not about suffering, but like we've objectified them to a degree that is absurd. And even in the industries in which people think like, oh no, they're just like we love them, we take care of them. I used to think that this comparison, like, oh, like you treat a dog one way and you treat an animal a different way. No, people also do not care about dogs and cats and companion animals. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't, and definitely not at scale, right? So yeah, I definitely think that I've heard the word like pet culture. Like pet culture needs to be ended. Animals who already exist deserve wonderful homes, in which they receive respect, care, and love. But we need to be spaying and neutering. There need to be far stricter laws put into place around, animal licensing. Breeding needs to be stopped. Yeah, that's my take there.
I like that. Okay. And I feel like we're kind of like we're just going directly into it, anti-natalism right now, because I'm like, okay, you talk. So wait, before that, I actually have I don't agree with the idea of spading pets. I don't think it's
Interesting.
because while I understand the idea of not bringing more animals into existence for the sake for them to be our slaves for entertainment or whatever we want them to be. I don't think it's fair towards the animals, right? Like to remove their sexual organs just because they're a bit aggressive if they have their sexual organs, or they don't fit into our society, or they're not how, like, shouldn't consent matter in this?
I think I've heard you say this once before, and it was like maybe a month ago. And I remember I had thought of a pretty, like a response to this because it really made me think.
Like,
And so, like, off the top of my head, I don't remember what it was, unfortunately. But so I guess my question to you is, like, I agree that it's complex, like the consent part of it, and
yeah.
is it for their best? And I don't think that most of the reason people spay their animals, or why I agree with it, is because they're aggressive, right? And I actually I'm curious about this because somebody else I saw on an Instagram comment somebody left on one of my reels or shorts or whatever, that there are actually other methods of spaying, right? Like we could make animals sterile without removing their sexual organs. I'm pretty sure, at least for a lot of them. Like for example, you can remove the tubes in female animals, and I don't know why vasectomies wouldn't also work on animals as well. So you still have like
Oh, yeah.
the only thing that you would be taking from them is their actual ability to create more of them. So is it? I guess I'm curious what exactly your concern with. So would you be more okay with that kind of sterilization for animals?
I guess so. I mean, um, it's hard, it's hard to know where to stop, right? Because for me, veganism is about fairness, it's about justice, and I think justice towards another sentient being would imply you leaving them 100% alone, for them to
Mm-hmm.
decide what they want to do for their own body. And body autonomy, I don't think is something that should be taken lightly. So us deciding for their body, while we have our their best interest in mind, even, I still don't think it's fair towards them because we can't get consent from them for everything that we want to do. But I know it's a bit more complex because we can't also get consent from kids, yet we do decide for kids. So it's it's hard to say. It's hard for me to express exactly what I mean. I just still think there is some little bit of unfairness over there. But I guess, as you put it, vasectomies or tube tying is a little bit less. So
Yeah, because
yeah,
that's something like I wasn't that educated about how they do spaying and neutering for animals, and I still only know a little bit more, but I know that I think they like literally take ovaries, uterus, everything like that, and I think for dogs and cats, they obviously I think they take the testicles like entirely.
yeah.
And I think that that might be, what you were saying about like the aggression. And I still need to do more reading and educating myself about this. But yeah, I do wonder if there's a middle ground where the only thing that we're doing is like stopping their actual ability to literally procreate, right? But they still are hormonally intact, and they just like, they maybe get put under like gas for a few minutes. And I think those should be very minimal procedures, especially, for the dogs, right? Um, yeah, I don't know. It is very interesting. I mean, for female animals, I wonder if there's also like an element of protecting them. I mean, I know that pregnancy can be very dangerous and uncomfortable, and they don't consent to pregnancy either, actually. Um,
That's a
so
good point.
I'm still a jury's still out for me on that one. But I do think that we need to change. I think there very well might be a great point about the degree to the type of sterilization we do for them.
Yeah, because I mean, I think what we're essentially doing is the problem that we've created, we're kind of putting it on them, right? In a
Mm-hmm.
sense, we're saying we brought you into existence, but we kind of want to take away parts of your existence or parts of your experience, because in our society, you would be fairer, like, because maybe they're aggressive, you would be fairer if you would not have your balls, or if you multiply, we we just create more issues for us, or anything. Like, I don't know, I feel like, should we ever do that to wild animals? No, then why should we do that to pets? That's kind of how I see it, at least. So
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely interesting, and I think that it's one of those things that needs to be considered, just like everything else.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a bit more, I guess it's a bit more complex. And with that in mind, I am wondering, um what's your take on abortion?
Okay, right into it. Okay, so this is actually something that I teased a little bit in a different video because so the backstory here is I was out doing my procreative ethics outreach and I was holding up my sign, "There's no good reason to have kids." And somebody came up to me and they were in the philosophy club, I think, and they had switched their major or something. And they actually agreed with me. They had some of the basic understanding of um, I'm going to add my little disclaimer here. I do not identify with antinatalism. I think as if like that I kind of said that wrong here anyways. But basically there's some some things that have gotten conflated with antinatalism and community-wise it's not something that I feel aligned with in a lot of ways. That's not to say that I think that it's right to create sentient life. It's just I view it more as like a tool for understanding rather than like an identity, I think. And that's a whole topic that I can get into. But anyways, I was out there with my son and we started talking about, whether it's right or not to create people. And he was very on board with me. Like we were pretty much agreeing on everything. So we branched off into other philosophical topics. And the thing that happened is I was talking about how I believe that when somebody intentionally creates somebody else, so like two people decide we're having a child now, I believe that they are responsible like for that person for the rest of their life, essentially. Like, not like I'm going out into the streets being like, you should be responsible for your children, but like for me, that logically follows one from the other, right? We would think the same thing about animals. If we intentionally breed animals, we're responsible for them. If we take
Yeah.
them on, we're responsible for them. And so the person then asked me, well, then do you think the same thing about abortions, right? Because they mentioned basically, well, what's the morally relevant difference between, keeping somebody alive if you've intentionally decided to create them, in your body versus once they're born, like with food, shelter, or resources, essentially. And I didn't really have an answer to that. I was like, wait, no, actually, like, I can't really reconcile those two views. Like, if I believe you're responsible in one scenario, why are you not also responsible in the other scenario? So basically, what that helped me figure out.
I don't know, like maybe you can help me out with this, but I assume that people who have abortions are people who didn't intend to have kids,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And that is where I started figuring out. Basically, it was me strengthening my understanding of abortion, right? And like why I believe in it. And exactly, the intentional part is what it all came down to for me. Because what I'd previously said is I would use like this bodily autonomy argument, or I would say that like, oh, well, a fetus is just a clump of cells or whatever. But what I realized is that why I'm so pro abortion is because we initially don't have the bodily autonomy to decide whether or not to get pregnant, when to get pregnant, the conditions under which to get pregnant, right? Like, that's not something that people have. We have not created the medical or societal conditions in which people actually have true freedom over their reproductive choices. So instead of like where previously I would have been like, abortion is always okay. Like, I don't care if that baby is one day before they're going to be born. If that pregnant person decides they don't want to be pregnant anymore, they should have the right to abortion. And I kind of still believe that in the real world. But what I was able to do was take a step back and think, okay, in a vacuum where that person actually genuinely flipped a switch and said, I understand the risks. I understand, this or that might happen to me. I understand the risk of childbirth. I understand what it means to create another person. I understand the implications of parenthood and childhood and what all of that means. Actually consent to it in a very informed, intentional manner. And then after the fetus gains sentience, because pre-sentience, I think abortion is always fair game, even in this hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
And then post-sentience, in that scenario, I was having a hard time like parsing out those views. And I guess I kind of realized that like in that situation, I can see those two things as being sort of comparable, and the fact that you might have like a sense of responsibility towards that individual. But of course, because that fantasy world is not where we live, abortion always needs to be free, easily accessible, and legal at all stages of pregnancy. And we need to be doing other things also to ensure that people have reproductive autonomy and rights.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. I wonder how do you define sentience though? Like because I mean, fetus sentience is a bit more complex than I don't know, just the capability of feeling emotions, because I think that they get pretty early on. Whereas maybe subjective experience or development of brain, how do you define sentience?
So I would say that when it comes to fetal sentience, I'm really not an expert by any means, right? So this is sort of like a hypothetical thing where it was like, oh, like, if we grant these things, right, then this. So I really don't have a great answer for that. I would defer to experts, and I don't have like a specific cutoff time for something like that.
Oh, interesting. So I actually read this interesting article about personhood and about how in America specifically, personhood is not granted legally to fetuses after sentience, because if they would acknowledge that sentience is the one thing that makes a person, they might need to do that also for animals.
Yes, exactly. That is another thing that I was thinking about as well, is like how we define personhood. And something that I think I realized when my perspective on animals really shifted is when I had this like aha moment of, oh, animals are people too, right? And that's also where like this abortion thing, I think, comes in, right? And I think why it's, maybe not directly related to veganism, right? But it still informs the way that we think about other important issues. Is, like the way that we think about sentience and personhood is very applicable to veganism, right? And so people who have qualms about what happens to sentient fetuses, right? We can, exactly, it's this idea of personhood and extending that, past, like how we grant personhood is a very essential question in a lot of these justice movements, veganism absolutely included.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have also dabbled with antinatalism myself, and I have seen the connection between veganism and antinatalism because of this sentience thing, right? And because of the idea of bringing somebody to life for a selfish reason, I would say, right? Because there is no selfish reason to have babies, to to procreate.
Mm-hmm.
There's no unselfish reason. I guess that's what I meant for
Mm-hmm.
procreation. So in that sense, it does relate to veganism in a lot of ways. But I think, like with antinatalism, what I disagreed with, and maybe I don't know if you agree with this, is the idea that that whole suffering idea of, well, they're gonna suffer either way, so that means you're basically making a decision for a person to bring them into a world where they, not just that they have potential for suffering, but rather that they have guaranteed suffering. Somebody, I think I remember being in an antinatalist meeting in a vegan camp out, and it's saying it's akin to pushing a baby stroller in the street, because you don't know how much they'll suffer or exactly what will happen. How much do you resonate with this stance of suffering and antinatalism?
So I don't. This is one of my shifts as well, where it's like the reason that I'm not really identifying with, antinatalism as much is because like you do get into these like arguments of like what is suffering, what is relevant suffering, right? Like, do we get to make the decision for other people to suffer or not? And I think that there are like just more relevant, interesting ways to talk about this kind of thing. But I mean, in my opinion, there is like a certain amount of suffering, right, that you're going to inflict on somebody without their consent, right? Like, I'm going to die. I'm going to watch my loved ones die. I live in a world in which I am aware of the extreme exploitation and use of non human animals, right? Like, how is that
Yeah.
my decision to inflict on somebody else? And like with the suffering thing, there is definitely a guaranteed amount of suffering. And I think that there's a very like clinical way that you can look at that, and recognize it without then going, well, my life is suffering, your life is suffering, and life sucks for everybody, right? Like you can still say like, oh, like there are a lot of bad things that will necessarily happen, and those things are bad enough to recognize that we should be very, very careful when inflicting that onto somebody else without then going, I'm now going to wallow in the knowledge that, life may be worse than it seems on the surface, and still enjoy your own life. I think we can have both of those conversations.
I completely agree with that. Like, I also I asked all the antinatalists I remember, do you wish you have never been born? And a lot of them say yes. And I guess I also don't relate to that, because I'm like, regardless of all the shit that happened to me, I'm like, life is cool, whatever. Knowledge is cool for me, so it's interesting. So
Yeah, I think the way that I approach that is not that like I wouldn't say that I would say I'm like fine with having been born, right? I just recognize that if I hadn't been, it wouldn't be bad for me. Like because I exist, like it's complete chance. Like you know, if I hadn't been conceived on the day I was, a completely different person would exist and I wouldn't exist. But we don't mourn the fact that that person doesn't exist, right? So I think that again, there's like a clinical way we can view it of like I can enjoy my life now that I exist, but I also equally recognize that if I did not, it would not be bad for me. It might be bad for you all, but not for me, not for the individual who doesn't exist.
I appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's also the whole idea of antinatalism, right? That non-existence isn't inherently bad, whereas existence has some potential bad to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? As far as I know. Um, What's your are you a deontologist? Are you a threshold deontologist, utilitarian? What's your moral philosophy that you usually follow?
I'm not a utilitarian. I would say I'm more on the deontological side of things. I'm still kind of like working through it all. I would say that I hesitate to say like, oh, I'm this or that, you know. I'm still like learning my philosophy and all that stuff, and I like to be a little bit more educated on things before I make like
Yeah.
specific claims. I think that I'm a little bit more like inclined to talking about, you know, specific things, and I've been able to create like a framework that is like consistent and reasonable within, you know, discussing those issues. But yeah, I hope that answers the question good enough.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, if you were to find out that going out on the street and promoting not abolition but reductionism for animals
Mm-hmm.
would yield, I don't know, let's just say you have this magical computer that will tell you, hey, if you tell people to reduce, you're just gonna be yielding way better results in the long run. People like animal agriculture would shrink to 50%, which is obviously better, right, than anything else, because at the end of the day we also want we just don't want any animals to be exploited regardless of what message we're sending or not. Like how's your position on that? What would you do?
So my position on that is we still need to advocate for just like ending the use and exploitation of animals. I do think that like, for example, there are a couple of campaigns that focus on factory farms, and I think that those things are not mutually exclusive. Um, so I think that you can have like a very, very abolitionist, you know, anti-animal exploitation stance, and still recognize that it might be like a very helpful step if we abolished factory farming, for example, and recognizing that that would have a massive impact towards that. I think that you can do that without compromising your message. I know that might be a hot take. I don't know exactly. I feel like I've been so lost in all the sauce, but I really think that that is possible. And so I don't know that they're mutually exclusive as long as you remain very on message, I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can always remain on message and saying that, being vegan is about
Mm-hmm.
opposing animal exploitation or animal oppression or whatever you want
Mm-hmm.
to call it, or how depends on how strict you want to be about it. But um, then you can say, but hey, anything is better than nothing or stuff like that, and maybe achieve some results in that manner. Oh, I forgot my point. I was gonna go to back to antinatalism, so how it is on, but I forgot. Okay, because I'm wondering if you're a deontologist. Well, yeah, that just makes sense then with antinatalism. Okay, let me check my questions. I got lost a little bit here. Sorry. I
Sure.
actually maybe we can
The,
even take a look at the chat and
yeah, there's a quick point that I also want to make that really ties veganism. Like there are two ways, right? But I think that's something that's really interesting that a lot of people don't think about is we have this idea of like saving animals, right? We're not really saving the animals who are being exploited right now. We're saving future animals from coming into
yeah,
existence, which is sounds awfully um, you know, similar to something else. I'm just gonna say, because yeah, like the animals we're advocating for right now, we know that the turnover rate is so unbelievably high unless we stop factory farming, or sorry, not factory farming, animal exploitation immediately, like literally this exact second, right? Like what we're doing is we're advocating for those animals to not come into existence to then be, you know, exploited. And that I think leads very easily into humans as well. Um,
yeah. And I mean, um, when you talk to people on the street about not bringing animal into existence, do you actually
mhm.
talk about not bringing animal to existence, or do you? Because
No.
I find like most people don't really understand this concept,
Yeah.
do they?
That's a problem also with talking about procreative ethics, right? Is there's people don't really think about things on this level, right? Like they this idea of like coming into existence, not coming into existence. Like we've taken this idea of like procreation absolutely for granted, right? Like people will just are just going to continue to create people. We're going to continue to create more animals. Like these things will always exist. And people have a very, very hard time not taking it personally, right? Like you like when I'm talking about like, oh, well, I can still recognize these things from my life, what you actually have to do is you have to separate yourself from yourself. And you have to say, I am still me. I can still enjoy my own life. And you have to completely think about this thing that we never really think about otherwise, which is something that is not existing, and then the decision to make it from not existing to existing. And people really put themselves in that. They think, well, I want to live, I love my life, I love my friends, I love my family, life is beautiful, I love the mountains and the trees and the smell of the rain on the forest floor. And they just think like, what if I stopped existing? Like, they immediately put that onto existing people and existing life, which is very hard not to do. It's very emotional. Like, I get it. But that's
Yeah.
also why it's very hard, and why I don't think that that would be a useful thing to talk about, and why it's not even really a useful thing to talk about. Like with vegans, even though I think that it is a very interesting part of the conversation, like what we're actually doing, like what a consequence of rejecting certain types of animal exploitation is, which is
Yeah.
the extinction of certain species, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think like we as vegans don't necessarily oppose the idea of bringing animals to life. We just oppose the idea of exploiting them, right? Like if you want to bring animals to life and let them live free and give them, like, you're basically just treating them as their own individuals. Would you have a problem with that?
I mean, it depends on what kind of situation you're bringing them into, right? Like, are you going to like breed a bunch of animals on a desert island where they have nothing to eat and they're going to die and starve, right? So I do think there's an interesting conversation to be had about um, the purpose of why you would be creating them, right?
Does purpose matter?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, imagine if I was, breeding a bunch of and then dumping them in a warehouse, right? Like,
I mean,
or just
by the way, when I mean breeding, we also have to respect the idea of body autonomy in all of this, right? So I don't know,
sure.
you're putting some candlelight, some dim lights, and some Eric Clapton or something, and then you put
Sure.
a bull and a cow together, and you let them do their thing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you are intentionally breeding animals, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's problematic. I think that you'd be using them. I like, yeah. I think you have a responsibility at that point towards them.
Yeah, I guess in the sense, yeah, so maybe animal ownership isn't necessarily, well, I don't believe in animal ownership. I guess both of us don't believe in animal ownership, right? So
Yeah.
let's create a context where we're not really owners of these animals. We're companions of these animals, right? We live in a world where veganism is widely spread. There are some cows somewhere, and you go to them and you create this atmosphere with Eric Clapton, dim lights, and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's actually what cows want to do, but I'm curious if, in a situation like that, do you think letting animals? Well, actually, you're just letting them breed, basically,
Yeah,
right? There's
you're
no
just
issues
leaving them
there.
alone.
Yeah, you're just leaving them alone, of course. Yeah,
Which again, like, because you use the words like if you breed them, and like again, I don't think that human involvement is acceptable there. Also, I'm seeing David Arenas in the chat. I'm not a deontologist. It's not an identity. Yeah. Against animal use, which is different. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I also like stay away from some of these like philosophical terms, because for me, veganism is just, it is separate from all those things. And I was thinking of it more in terms of like, the antinatalism of it all. And yeah, veganism is very simple. It's just rejecting animal use. I mean, it doesn't have to have like a label like, um, deontological or, whatever like that.
I mean, I would imagine that the way I see it, veganism is pretty deontological. But this is a very good point that David Ciarinas makes, that
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to identify with the
Yeah,
ontology to be vegan. You can just be vegan
exactly.
without
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
accepting what.
Mm-hmm. I think that the whole identity versus not identity thing is really interesting. And yeah, I think also a bigger conversation that needs to happen, like what we decide to identify with and not, and why and how, and the consequences of that. Also interesting. And that's why I think I'm more interested in thinking about the issues themselves. And I think it also makes it more accessible to average people.
Interesting. What drives you to? This is one of these questions that I wrote down. Like, what exactly is driving you to continue advocating for these causes? Is it like, is there anything that keeps you motivated, or is it just one of these inertia things where you started at some point, you know what you believe in, and you're just going on with it? I mean, let me just say, on my side, there are times when I'm driven by inertia, by just
Mm-hmm.
going along with the message and that I know I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when I'm just motivated by seeing cute animals and thinking, what the hell is it that we're doing to them? So I'm curious, what is it that motivates you to be fighting or advocating for any of these two causes that you fight for, procreative ethics or animals?
Yeah, so I think that it's a basic sense of right and wrong. And like, I don't want to live in a world in which I think that I make sense of the world through sort of like right and wrong, how we treat others, like based off our sentient individual experiences. And I am not happy living in a world in which we treat others as resources. And I think that with animals, that's obviously very clear how we treat and use them as resources. I think that that's awful, obviously. And the same thing is true of procreation. I have yet to see a point, like a person who has procreated or talks about wanting to do it, where it's not about them, right? And we use children, we use them to prop up the economy, we use them to further society, further our goals. There is no, like you said, there's no selfless way to have a child. And because human beings are in this very specific situation where we're not like animals in that sense, because we can actually make the specific choice now, which is very, very recent. A lot of people do not realize how incredibly recent it is that we can actually choose whether to procreate or not. Like I'm talking within the last 70 years and even like more recently, and not even universally, right? There are still
Yeah.
parts of the world where people don't actually have a choice about that. And that is like, again, like it's just being against use and exploitation of sentient individuals. And for me, that veganism is its very own movement for animals, but that same sentiment to me also like applies to people separately when we're talking about things like procreation. Like if we're using human females for their bodies, we're using children in all these
Yeah.
ways. And it is exploitative and it is use. And I think we need to be having very serious conversations in the same way that we recognize animals should be free of these things. We need to have a very serious conversation also about the roles of those two groups of people and the way that we use and exploit them and for what end.
I like that. So it is also a justice thing for you as more, because when you say
Yeah.
right and wrong, it just feels like justice. It feels the idea of justice.
Yeah.
And what is like, I'm guessing is the golden rule also for you, right? The idea of justice, the axiom that you base your justice on, or how do you base your justice on?
Yeah. So that's a complex question. I don't know that I'm going to give the perfect answer here, but I think it's pretty simply just as long as, again, I'm hesitant to say because it's such an important thing to say, right? But like I think as long as you're not using or exploiting others and your actions aren't, I'm going to use the word, aren't like harming other people, right? Like that's where I think you're okay, right? Like just make sure that others are able to live their lives and that you are not intruding on, um, their individual experiences. And I think that definition needs to expand, right? I do think that creating somebody is infringing on that. I think that the way that we treat children is infringing on that. Obviously, the way we treat animals is infringing on all of that, right? So you actually said something that really changed my view. And I think you were talking to Lucy, and you said that you're trying to get people to expand their idea of justice, or
Yeah.
and you said that something along the lines of most people don't even know why they oppose things like slavery or why they are for like certain kinds of social justice, and they don't. And you're
I
right.
don't.
And so that's kind of shifted my perspective too. Like I had a little bit of a mini crisis of like realizing just how far we have to go with a lot of the stuff, because yeah, I think you're right. People don't know why they think what right and wrong, and they just, I think, do what other people model for them, and that's a scary thought.
And do you think then, because I'm currently in a crisis mode about this myself, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, I'm realizing that most people, so I'm a type of person who likes to understand things. I don't just
Yeah.
learn things. I like to understand them. And as far as I understand from what you have talked about so far, you're the same type of person. You like to understand things and you like to judge them on your own, which is what most people don't really want to do. Most people will just follow somebody. They will just follow some rules. Or they're just not, like literally, like a lot of people oppose slavery because they've been told to oppose slavery. That's it. So do
Mm-hmm.
you think that then, as vegan activists, or I mean, I guess as activists in general, do you think that we should be approaching or try to reach people who are more open to the ideas, so that we can get more people on board with veganism? so that we can force the other people at some point. Well, by force I mean like just teach them, or like laws and stuff like that. Or should we just keep trying to educate people and hope that by trying to educate them to think for themselves, we're actually helping not just veganism or procreative ethics, but even more than that, because we're helping people learn how to think.
I think that helping people learn how to think is very important. And I'm going to name drop How Minds Change a third time in the stream because it talks about. Have you read it? Are you familiar?
No, I have not read it, but now
You
now
must.
I have to. Now it sounds like, yeah, how
You
minds
must.
change. Okay.
It's here. It's here for everybody watching too, if you're curious. This is the book. It's about this thick. And it's at the very least very interesting and thought-provoking. Whether you come to different conclusions or not, I do think that it's very interesting. And like I think that learning how to change people's minds, it really does talk about like how to induce behavior change, right? And it's not always just like there's a lot of value in just like presenting the information as it is, but I do think that like diversifying techniques, I mean, I really think that something really interesting that the book mentions is that we've evolved, or rather there's like studies that show that we've evolved to not reason internally, but reason as a group. So the reason that we kind of get stuck in our own ideas is because like one person gets really invested in this one thing, and then we all come together and then talk about it from all these different perspectives. And then the idea is that we have this adaptability that allows us to basically pick the best reasons out of those and then adopt those as a group. So we may actually not be like, a lot of people may not actually be programmed to do that internal reasoning, and we may need those external forces. So I think that honestly, I think there's like a mentality problem in the way that people approach new ideas, and I think there's a lack of openness. I think that a lot of people have their lives, their autonomy threatened and stuff like that in this group identity, right? Like we're very, very divided in a lot of ways, and I think that that's scary for a lot of people. So I think we're really missing that group reasoning element that would be really, really helpful in just helping people to think more openly and differently. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle, and how that fits in, I don't know.
That's interesting. But if that's the case, then I mean, things might change faster than we expect, because when I remember when I started activism, which also wasn't that far along, right? I guess 1.5 years, something like that for me. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I started, everybody was like reluctant or whatever. But nowadays, everybody tells me that they either have a friend or a family member who's vegan. Everybody, like I haven't heard a single person say nobody I know is vegan or something like that. Wow. So everybody has somebody. So that means that we're kind of expanding. We're going horizontally, which is really good. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I need to shift my. I'm wondering because I forgot my point of view again. I'm sorry. For me, it's pretty late. The reason why I keep forgetting my point it's because I've had a 8-hour workday, and now I'm
my gosh,
pretty late. Is there like okay, let me just go to my questions. I think that's easier. That's always the sure. Oh yeah, do these where did I put this? Does fighting for these causes ever make you feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely a sense of overwhelm. It's like when you like, first of all, you have veganism, and then you add procreative ethics, like people look at you like you have 3 heads if you ask them like anything philosophically questioning, procreation. And then like, and again, like something that's also, overwhelming is, trying to find the best way to advocate for these things, to stay true to the message, to stay true to, the victims who are the animals. And yeah, I would say there's definitely a sense of overwhelm. But whenever I like try and turn away from it a little bit, I get called back. I just don't like living in this world the way that it is. And yeah, I guess that it needs to be changed, and I'm restless when I'm not, and the animals need it. And if I were the animals, I wouldn't think it was excusable to not do anything. And I don't like living with that selfishly, I guess.
That's an interesting one. And how is your family with all this? Are your parents okay with you doing activism? Are they vegan themselves? I'm guessing you always I mean, I always have conversations with my parents about it, and it's always goes to shit. But I'm wondering how it is for you.
I'm pretty lucky in that respect. My mother is very, very on board, and I would say that she is very, very aligned with veganism. And I would say she's most of the way there. My father, a little bit less so. He gets it. He's very supportive, but he's less receptive. I would say he's a little bit more stuck in his ways, but again, very supportive. And yeah, everyone's okay with it, which is pretty cool.
And how do you deal with? So I guess my parents are also okay with it. Like they're just not vegan. That's for me. It's
Yeah.
like it kind of pisses me off. And how do you deal with like this idea of your loved ones, the people who I guess not necessarily that you look up to them, but like you connect with them. You have a special connection with them. Are the very people that are doing the very thing that you are kind of fighting against?
Yeah, I think that it really comes down to a certain degree of compartmentalization, which is like
Yeah.
you pick your battles essentially. And something that I also try and remember to avoid burnout is that I try and think of myself in the third person, like a little bit like I'm still like there's still this individual who needs to be taken care of, who needs to have certain, needs met, like live a certain kind of life. And having connections with people is one of those things, right? And so I allow myself a certain amount of grace, and like while I'm obviously like extremely disappointed in them and I do have conversations when appropriate, are also certain times where I, I take a step back and I think I'm just going to watch this movie, or, we're just going to have, like to just view them as, I think Miyoko Shinner, I think is how you say her name. She, of the cheese, the vegan cheese company, she referred to people as pre-vegans. And I think it comes down to having empathy for myself at the end of the day. To
Oh, that's
just,
that's
yeah.
that's an interesting perspective. Do you have your own day to yourself where you try not to like I think when I discussed it with Justin from Debug Your Brain, I remember telling him that it's not that I need a break from veganism. I need a break from the fact that I'm vegan and the world isn't. So I need a break from the whole idea of veganism in a sense that as it is now a I don't know, a whole, a little bit of a portion of what the world is. Like if the world would be vegan, it would just be normal. So I need a break from the idea that that isn't normal sometimes, and I just
Mm-hmm.
seclude myself in my house and watch videos or whatever. And I try not to watch videos that ever remind me of the fact that we live in a non-vegan world. Do you ever get stuff like that? How do you handle these situations?
Yeah, I think that I have like pockets like that. Like I have certain media that, I mean, for me, it's Rhett and Link. They're about as not vegan as it gets. And that I find endlessly frustrating, but it's still just this little pocket of like denial that I allow myself for kind of like mental health reasons, I guess. It's just like I think you sort of need that escape in a sense to avoid burnout. And it's, it just
Yeah.
is what it is. And sometimes like little versions of like that too, it's like I also try to remember like the power of being like a representative of something, like visibility, right? So I try and also remember that, give myself you can't just show up to every sort like social situation and like, you know, be loud and like I don't know. We're getting into like, precarious territory here. But yeah, I do believe in like letting yourself delude yourself into thinking that you're living in a vegan world, I guess. You're living in your own little bubble and then just giving your mind a break. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of want to know what your take is on disruptive activism now that you kind of mentioned this. Is it, do you, have you participated in some form of disruptive activism? Do you agree with it? Do you think, I don't know, maybe triggering people or yelling at some people can be effective?
I've never participated in it. I'm not against it. I just haven't really been in a place where that has been happening and I haven't really chosen to organize it because it's not really how I think I inherently sort of tick in that respect. But I do think that, when I was researching about PETA, there's a lot of really interesting points to be made about shifting. I think it's the Overton window, which is, what people think is acceptable, basically. So you have people doing more extreme stuff, and then suddenly the stuff that used to be extreme looks a little bit more normal and approachable. So I think that there's some value there as well. And again, I think it's like that axe swinging thing. I think that, even the destructive stuff can likely be positive. I don't think there's a ton of data or evidence for that. But my thing is that I would like to trust activists and people who are doing their best for animals. And, you know, if there are people who feel like that's what they need to be doing, I think power to you. And everybody should be educated and do what they can. And if that's one of those
I
things,
appreciate that.
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I myself, ever since learning about this thing, as I said, that most people won't actually understand or want to be vegan because they don't really care to understand most things in the world, but rather just accept the rules for as they come to them. I've been questioning whether, well, then maybe shouting at them 20 times will eventually get them to understand the message, or maybe triggering people will get them to look into it, will get them to, hey, I want to prove this person wrong. I actually have spoken to some vegan activists who told me that the reason why they became vegan was because somebody said something that triggered them and they wanted to look into it and prove them wrong. So I don't know, it's kind of weird, I feel like both of us kind of align with the idea that of understanding things, but then how can we find the people who want to be the same, who understand things? Like, should we ask them a question at the beginning? How do you approach the world? Do you approach it with the curiosity of understanding how things work, or do you just approach it with seeing how things work? I don't know. Well, how would you, if you were to ask a question at the beginning, one question to kind of grasp which direction a conversation is going to go into, what question would that be?
I think that, I don't know if this is the perfect answer, and I'm going to go back to the book because I've been reading and thinking about it a lot, but one of the questions is, because they talk about some of this like sort of street activism stuff, is they ask if you could flip a switch and find out that your view was wrong, would you want to know?
If you could flip a switch and find out if your view is wrong.
Like if I presented you with a button and they, like, let's say they had a view or whatever. And that, like, for example, they used like God. If I could present you this button and it would, if you push the button, you would choose to push the button and it would definitively tell you that God does not, or the truth about like God does or does not exist, would you push the button, or do you want to remain in your belief? And I think that might be kind of getting at what you're talking about here when it comes to a question to judge where they're at.
Can you formulate that question again? Because I was writing it down.
Sure. If I could give you a button right now, and if you chose to press the button, it would give you the truth about, like, or if it would, I can't remember if it would tell you the opposite thing, or or if it would just tell you the truth. I can't remember, but I can look at it in the book, or maybe you should just read the book and figure it out for yourself too.
Yeah, there you go. Homework for me.
Homework for you. And I mean, I can look into it too, but I think that might be a good one, because I think it's sort of a gauge for how much they actually want to, seek the truth or have their actual views challenged.
Yeah, okay. I'll ask ChatGPT about it also. By the way, do you use ChatGPT in any of your forms of activism?
Not really. I have used it to, like, when I'm reading something and it's a little bit out of my depth, I will ask it to summarize for me in different terms. So I've kind of used it in like a learning sense. And I think I tried to use it to come up with channel names, actually, throwback to coming up with the word tofu dog.
Tofu dog.
It didn't help. It did a pretty bad job, honestly. So I wouldn't say extensively, but I do think it has its uses for stuff like that.
I was going to say, when you reach like a certain number of subscribers, you should actually try to sculpture a dog made of tofu or something. That would be an interesting stream, I would say, because if you do these things from memory, you just take, like, I think in the US you can find these giant blocks of tofu, get a giant block of tofu and try to make something
tofu.
out of it.
Okay, yeah. Got it. That would be fun.
Make a dog from tofu, maybe just their head or something.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, why not? I'm sure that would go really poorly, but I think that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
I saw a question in the chat a couple of minutes ago, if that's okay, if I may commandeer.
Yeah. I also saw a question in the chat and I was looking for it. Yeah, go on. Perfect. Tell me which one you saw.
Brother Marcus asks, how important is it to read the literature on animal ethics and animal rights?
Exactly that one.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I think that it's very important. That would be my view. I think that there is so much to learn from from books, from the people who founded the movement. I think that something that a lot of people don't know is that there's actually a difference between being vegan and, being for animal rights. Animal rights
Yeah.
is a very broad term, veganism is a very specific thing. And there's a lot of intermingling of those, which is where I think a lot of the problems within veganism come from. This whole like reducing suffering, reducing harm is different from veganism. And that's all stuff that we can learn. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the history if we understand why and how animal exploitation started to happen. Even having a better understanding of, like some of the consequences of, some of the actions, like what will these things lead to? And even some of the literature about behavior change, for example. I think that these are all vital things. And I think that reading is underrated. So
No,
definitely
I mean, I
important reading.
completely agree with you. Do you think that as animal rights activists, we have a moral obligation to try and do and be more objective in our approach, and more objective or more scientific in our approach to people, so that we can like read more materials or try to convince people in the best way that works?
I don't even know if I would use the word moral obligation. I just don't know why you wouldn't want that. Again, it kind of comes down to like, if you
Yeah,
really care about animals and
that's true.
doing your best job, why would you not be interested in learning the history of this? Why would you not be interested in making sure that you're on message and trying to genuinely do your best? I mean, to me, that's kind of what this is all about, right? So I would hope so.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because when you do your best, you do it for the cause that you're fighting. So, of course, why would you be fighting for a cause if you don't want that cause to happen, right?
Yeah. So I think again, one naturally follows from the other, in my opinion. I hope, Brother Marcus, that answers your question.
I tried to find his comment, but I couldn't find his comment in the. Um, okay, let me see, because I had a couple more questions. But meanwhile, everybody, if you have questions for Tofu Dog, please drop them in the chat. I will remind you yet again, Tofu Dog's YouTube channel is Tofu Dog for you. And please, if you share like, just go and subscribe. She does excellent stuff. Okay, and as you can see, she's answering all of my questions in a very complete manner. That's kind of, I think, why I'm struggling to find questions now, because you're like, when I ask you one question, you answer it in such a good way. I love
Thank
it.
you.
I love it. It's
Thank
nice.
you. Yeah, I love information. I love sharing information. I love receiving information. So I always when I ask a question, I always want like as much information as somebody has to give me. So I think I naturally default to that because I think information sharing is how we learn. And I think that learning is just essential to, living, like being better activists, being better for the animals, understanding why we're doing this. Um, acting in ways that align with our values. And I think the only way we can figure that out is by being curious about ourselves, being curious about the world. And, you know, like veganism is its very own movement, right? But it also doesn't hurt to have a holistic understanding of our lives, how we think about things, right? And aligning all of those things, I think, just makes us stronger as people. And so, yeah, I always encourage curiosity. And I mean, only good things have come out of it. It can be a little scary sometimes, right? Like when we talk
Yeah.
about these like procreative ethics stuff, like you're looking a question into the eye, like what, like should we create people is a very heavy question, right? But you can also talk about it in ways that are less heavy. And, I think they're important. And I think we need to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable in our curiosity.
Okay. I just saw a question right now from Lewis asking, "What happened to your bangs?" At
Oh, they're here. I just didn't didn't blow dry them correctly. That's all. And I've been brushing them aside a little bit because I kind of like the look a little bit better. So yeah, they're here. They're just like pushed aside. See, they're kind of like they're there.
So
There.
I want to pick your brain a little bit. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about the idea, because obviously, like, we read all this book, we gather all this information, but I feel like vegan activism is its own beast of its own. Like, I feel like it's one of those things that it's supercharged convincing. It's not just this little thing where you're trying to convince people of something. You're going against societal norms, against social programming, against cognitive dissonance. Is just, you're fighting everybody basically when you're
Yeah.
speaking to somebody. And I feel like one way to know which is the best way to do activism would be to kind of have a form of, I don't know, in a way that you need to know what people will do after you talk to them, right? Like a follow-up of sorts. If you
Hmm.
see if have these people reduced, have these people became vegan, what's your take on that? Like, how would you like? I have a friend who we talk about this so much, and we were thinking of, like me setting up a camera and talking to somebody, and him just going out somewhere and asking, "Hey, why did you talk to that guy?" Like behaving as if he's a stranger, and kind of asking what he got out of the conversation, just to kind of see what works and what doesn't. Because I think we'll never know what works and what doesn't with such a complex topic unless we have some form of control right over it. Like, has this worked? Has this not worked? Because we don't know.
Yeah. Um. So, is there like sorry, it went so
Yeah,
long,
I
I
mean, my
forgot the
question to
question.
you is, how would you like? I'm just trying to pick your brain more than anything. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a question,
Okay.
but like, how would you think we should approach? We should do this. Like, how can we get response from people whether they actually did something or not? Because we can't police them, right? We just educate at some point.
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know if we're really at I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's been possible for any other justice movements previously either, right? I think like I think it needs to be bigger. I think that that's really essential because right now we're just like individual people, right? There are some organizations certainly, but I think that I mean, the closest thing I can come up with is hosting an event, like an outreach event where, maybe you give a presentation, maybe you
Hmm.
challenge people and then like you kind of conducting a survey. So I think I just invented conducting surveys, like scientific surveys. um, but like an event where, maybe you invite people over and over again and you like, maybe you have 50 people, you show them a speech. Maybe you have 50 people and they each get spoken to in an outreach conversation and maybe they agree ahead of time that they're going to tell you afterwards, the impacts like in 30 days, in 6 months, in a year. But outside of being really upfront that that's what somebody is getting into, I don't really know. I mean, people are already incredibly unreliable when it comes to like
Yeah.
getting in contact and following up about stuff. So I don't at this time really see a way to do that without being really part of a big organization that's going to organize something with that intention.
Have you gotten any like messages from people that you have chatted before, contacting you, just follow up or something?
I haven't gotten a follow up from anybody who I've had a vegan conversation with, but I have had somebody reach out to me who I had a procreative ethics conversation with. And he
Hmm.
actually reached out to me and thanked me for like opening his eyes to this. He was like completely blown away. And he said I got him into philosophy and he started reading a bunch of different books. And it was really a very meaningful interaction. And it made me realize that there are people who have a thirst for this kind of thing. And there are a bunch of curious people who just, I don't think we have a culture of curiosity really right now, at least, not that I've observed. And I mean, it's especially, I think that people have like a bad reaction to the word vegan. So I don't think you get the same reaction to the vegan sign. But when I hold up the, like, there's no good reason to have kids sign, people just come up and thank me. Like, they don't even want to have a conversation. They thank me. And, or
That's
they'll
pretty
like,
cool.
they have like a little like, wow, I never thought about it. Or it's like, I can hear like little conversations starting here and there. So I know that at least in that respect, that does give me some degree of hope. And I think that, it, yeah,
Have you thought
I don't know.
about, I'm just questioning, like, as you say it now, like if people come and talk to you and you say, like people who
Mm-hmm.
agree with you specifically and come and
Mm-hmm.
say, there's no good reason to have kids. Have you thought about approaching veganism with those people instead of procreative ethics? I'm just curious because it feels like then maybe those people have some form of understanding about all of it.
I mean, it's possible. Although I think that like the thing with having kids is a lot of people, you know, there's a ton of reasons, right? Like a lot of it isn't even ethically necessarily motivated. A lot of people, or they have like the inklings of understanding, that there's a problem with the way that we view procreation. Um, but usually they're not like stopping for very long, right?
Mm.
And it's not a bad idea. I hadn't actually really considered that, and just because actually the way my sign is set up right now is one side says there's no good reason to have kids come talk to me, the other side says you should be vegan, come talk to me. So I could pull the flipperoo and literally flip my sign around. I could definitely try that. um
Oh, interesting. So the people who come and have a conversation with you, they know it's about veganism directly.
yeah, my sign says you should be vegan, come talk to me, because I think that being upfront is good. And I think again, like, I'm trying to change their understanding of what veganism is, and being direct about that. Like, I think that that's comfortable for me. And then also, like, I try to present myself again, like, as somebody who is relatable, somebody who used to be like you and you can be like me. And I want them to associate that interaction with veganism right off the bat. Um, so for me, that's worked so far.
Interesting. For me, I find that when I do that, I find it hard to establish a moral baseline, and people usually start to, well, not lie, maybe, but or maybe lie. Maybe lie is the right word, where they try to just to suit their own narrative. They'll bite any bullet and say all kinds of horrible things, and they'll no
Yeah.
longer that moral baseline will always be gone. So I'm wondering if you do you ever have this issue because you're not establishing a moral baseline before your conversation?
So the thing is, I usually immediately start by asking them why they came over. So I'll ask, like, so you saw my sign that says you should be vegan. Um, what is it about my sign that made you want to come over here and talk to me? And so that way I can understand them. And then I will usually ask them, like, after their answer, like, so how do you understand veganism? Like, what does veganism, like, basically, what's your understanding of veganism? And then I will basically give them my like the definition of veganism, which is being against animal use and exploitation for all purposes, including food, clothing, entertainment, and experimentation, etc. And that's kind of how I reestablish that. And I asked them, like, how does that sound to you? Like, how does, you know, opposing animal exploitation? So I kind of like lure them in with the word vegan and then redirect it to, what veganism actually is, and try to have the conversation from that perspective. So I do it like in the reverse, I think, of what you do, kind of.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I might try that. That sounds very interesting. I might actually try that. I feel like for me it's also a little bit more difficult because there's always a language barrier, and that's also the areas where I go and do activism in Amsterdam. People are always dicks. I'll just say it. They're dicks. Um, for lack of a better word, I don't know a better word how to describe them. What's your take on? I saw somebody ask in a chat by a while ago, and I'm actually curious. What's your take on ex-vegans?
I mean, depends on the situation, right? I think that this narrative that somebody who's an ex-vegan was never vegan is false. I think that that's a ridiculous thing to say. I think that that is actually really problematic, because what we're not doing is we're not acknowledging the fact that we need to do things to keep people vegan. I personally know people who went vegan. Obviously, we know it's an oxymoron, but ethically, right? They weren't under delusions that veganism was a plant-based diet or that is for the environment. They watched the footage, they internalized the message, and then they eventually went back to not to participating in animal exploitation. And I personally know that it is false to say that that person was never vegan, right? So I think that we need to be very careful to understand if that person was actually vegan or plant-based, and what their purposes for, whatever choice they made were, if they're actually defining themselves correctly. And it comes back to that community building thing that we were talking about earlier, is people need to
Yeah.
be able to have touch points, community to stay involved, and to really stay in touch with that, because again, the normal world is, I think, seductive for people. And I think that that's just a reality, and that's something that we should address. So we should learn from those things and build a supportive, bigger network where possible, to keep people in the community as much as possible.
And how important do you think is like watching documentaries or footage of what animals go through in this whole idea? Because I think like I remember some people telling me that the reason what keeps them going vegan is sometime from time to time watching this type of footage or stuff. Like, how important do you think it is in activism, and how important do you think it is in keeping people vegan?
I think that it depends on the person, honestly. I think that for some people, the amount of watching that kind of thing that might be right for one person might actually completely burn out another person. So I think that the important thing is to really be in touch with yourself, make sure that you're really educating yourself, and try different things, right? Like, I can't tolerate a lot of watching the footage, but every once in a while something will show up in my Instagram feed, and it's like a little, like, it zaps me back into place, I guess. Not that I was like ever like wavering, right? But it's like a very, very, very clear reminder. And I do think that that's good to a certain degree, but I also think that people will actually get, like, you can get PTSD from overwatching footage and stuff like that. And I think that's a very real thing to be aware of too. And people should avoid burnout where possible. So I think it's all about really getting to know yourself and getting to know your your abilities and your limits, and just doing your best and being intentional about it.
I completely agree with that. I think it's on a case by case basis also, right? If some people, because for me, I also don't get motivated by watching footage. But do you
Mm-hmm.
think that when we do activism, it's important that people see images or footage of what animals go through? Do you think that sets a, do you think that does something to the message?
I think that, so I haven't done it yet, but it is something that I've considered, because I actually think that for a lot of people, those images stay, right? Like, it's hard to forget that. So I think at the very least, you'll leave a lasting impression. And I think that, like, you can frame it like, look at, this objectification and the degree to which we've objectified them and the degree to which we use them, right? Like, I think that it can, at the very least, be a wake up call. And I think that there's definitely value in that. I think that it maybe depends on the context of the conversation. But I've thought about having a little tablet with a little, short video on it, and maybe
Yeah.
using that as a tool, if it feels like the conversation is going in that direction. I mean, it like I said, it really changed. It snapped me out of the previous reality that I was living in. I think when you're face to face, you can't really deny their personhood and their experience when you watch something like that. So I think I think it definitely has value. I mean, I would encourage everyone to watch it, so at the very least they know what they're paying for if they are not vegan.
Yeah, I mean, I actually I actually recently had a conversation where I was talking to some people and they were like understanding the idea of veganism, but then they said, you know what, I'll just continue because that's normal or something. So then I pulled out Alexandra. Do you know Alexandra's folder? I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I watched your live stream with her, at least like a
It's
part of it.
it's a very good folder. So I pulled it out and I showed them. Okay, well, before you go, let me just show you exactly what you are agreeing to continue participating in, and it changed their mind, which was surprising. Yeah, so I myself don't usually show footage or stuff like that as well. I usually just have conversations with people because I'm a logical person and I expect people to try and understand and be logical about it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think like footage does appeal a little bit to emotions, which kind of gets them in that at least lowers their defenses, right? In a sense that you're not trying to force something on them. You're not trying to convince them of your view. You're just trying to show them that they themselves are against it, and you're trying to provide an excuse for it. An excuse, sorry, a solution to it.
Yeah, I think at the very least it's a foot in the door, right? It's like it sort of
Yeah.
speaks for itself, and I think that that can be very powerful.
Yeah, I also think that it would be a bit more powerful if we would recycle a little bit of that footage, because I feel like Anonymous for the Voiceless uses that footage for a while now, and I think some people have seen that so many
Mm.
times that they're like,
Mm.
okay, I've seen this before, or I've seen this before, and maybe just choosing different scenes or something would already be a big deal. Okay, well, I think we're approaching the 2-hour mark. I'm pretty tired. And I think we've had a lot of awesome conversations so far. And I want to ask you some questions that I usually ask towards the end. But before that, um, I want to give the chat a chance to ask some
Yeah, that's
questions. If you guys have any questions, please. Now's the time to ask the questions. Now's you got Tofu Dog here answering all your questions, and she's not drawing, she's not playing, you've got all her attention right here, right now. So I know you want to ask some questions. So yeah. Johnny Vegan Seed asks me, who made your glasses? Okay, well, these are new glasses. Yes, thank you, Johnny. I think Christina also noticed at the beginning. I got them from Ace and Tate. I don't know if you have the store. It's one of the stores in Amsterdam that I kind of like because they have this approach where all glasses are kind of the same price. They have kind of the same services. They have a good guarantee, and I buy them every year. So I just go every year and I change them. And this recurring thing gets me cheaper glasses and ones that I like, because I'm very careless. I really scratch my glasses and break them pretty often. Wait, where was it? How much do you like tofu?
I
Asks Michael
genuinely love
10.
it. I genuinely love it. I am a big I like, honestly, probably every day.
Same,
Yeah.
same. Tofu,
It's
smoked
a
tofu.
supreme food. Oh, I usually don't go for smoked, but I should.
Smoked tofu is so versatile because I don't have to cook it. I don't have to do anything with it.
Mm.
If I'm too lazy, I'll just put a bunch of slices on some bread or something with some spread, and bam,
That does
protein,
sound
everything
amazing.
good. What did you eat for breakfast?
Today I actually had hash browns, tofu scramble, and a bagel with some vegan Nutella spread on vegan chocolate
Yes.
spread on it.
Sky asks, if I have 2 kids, does that cancel out an anti-natalist?
No, it doesn't. Thank you for your question, Sky. No, I think that you just sort of exhibit a fundamental, I mean, maybe this is just a joke, but I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of antinatalism. I think that we need to stop viewing children as commodities, and we need to be a lot more careful about, creating them. And I think that, like even a joke like this, it's kind of, I mean, I understand it's like a joke on the veganism thing, but maybe I don't know how serious you are, Sky. We can talk about it sometime if you like. But yeah, no, the
Okay.
commodification of children is genuinely very serious.
Okay.
And
Wait, but when you talk about, because now I'm like, when you talk about commodification of children, are you
sure.
saying that people who have kids are commodifying their children?
Yeah, like they view them as accessories, or they view them as like a way to achieve a certain kind of like goal in life, right? Or like to achieve status too. We know people get status through having children, and yeah, I think that there's a lot of parallels in use and exploitation.
Before birth, but after birth, not, right?
No, I think
I would
after
assume.
birth too. I mean, like the institution, I think that of the way that we view and treat children. So there's a term called childism. I'm going to recommend a book really quickly. So it's a term I hadn't heard before, but it's
You
in
mentioned
this
it.
book here. A new approach to procreative ethics. It kind of goes into this childist approach, and it completely changed my worldview. Like I would say, I haven't had a shift this fundamental since learning about veganism. And so this book, I don't like endorse the author necessarily, but what it really does is it really highlights that children are an incredibly oppressed class, and the world is really not set up for them, and it really changed my perspective on that. So I really recommend people look into childism. There's actually an entire book over here. I haven't read it yet, but it's about the entire concept of childism. And I saw earlier Lawrence Anton asked a question about other books that we find
Yeah,
interesting.
I was gonna
Oh,
say, yeah, that's the next question. Yeah, exactly.
that's funny. So yeah, I would say that childism is outside of antinatalism, even if it is like related to procreative ethics, obviously. So well, I haven't read that one. I've really been so immersed in the topics these days. I would say the other thing that I've been really interested in is learning about the history of contraception, because that's the objectification of women and humans with female bodies. There's a website actually. So the person who invented the birth control pill, as we know, is named Margaret Sanger, and that was in I forgot exactly when it was, but it was like the 1900s. And there's this very fascinating website that has archived some letters that women wrote to her about like the fact that they have no way to control their procreation, that their bodies are just being used and used and used, and they have no way to take care of these kids, and they're basically
Yeah.
begging for access to like a way to not be subjected to that process. And it's extremely harrowing, and I really recommend that. I can send it to you. Maybe we can put it in the description later, because it's eye-opening, and I think a lot of people really underestimate how grueling and objectifying pregnancy, childbirth, and all that stuff really is and can be and continues to be.
I mean, I have seen it myself,
Mm-hmm.
so I agree with you, and I also, I mean, I agree with everything that you say about the procreative ethics that you mentioned, and I think we're kind of on the same page.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, let me just go to the questions because I forgot again. This is what happens when I'm tired. I just keep forgetting stuff. Yeah,
I'm also chatty.
I need protein. Yes, that's what I need. By the way,
Don't we all?
Lawrence, you're a pretty handsome fellow, man. I was looking at your photo right there. That smile is very pretty. I gotta say that. I just wanna. I think Oluwali asks this question that I asked you also at the beginning. If you could only do one activism forever, would you do animal rights activism? Would you do antinatalism activism or vegan activism?
Vegan activism, definitely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you, have you watched that video, the movie that I told you? 4 months.
No, I
Oh,
haven't
it's so
yet.
good. 4 months,
Okay.
3 weeks, 2 days.
Interesting.
It's
Interesting.
about you. It's I mean, I think Sky told me about it, so it's something that you should watch. It's something that everybody in US should watch. This is what happens when you. It's basically what happens when you ban abortion. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's
and
awful.
and it's something that my mom actually used to tell me about. So it's kind of like based in reality. It's not just it's not fiction or anything.
Yeah, yeah, it is reality. It is reality.
Okay. Uh, with regards to community, any suggestions for community building, maintenance, and thoughts on infighting? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, so community building, my best bet so far has, my attempt at streaming, right? And I think that in-person community is even better, probably. So just try, and it's hard, right? Like people kind of live far away. There's a local group here that I've just barely started getting a little bit more involved in, and it's really nice to just genuinely connect with people. Maintenance wise, it's hard because it really depends on the people in the community, right? Like I think that, with the infighting stuff, I think is at a very precarious time, because I think that the separation that we were talking about between veganism and animal rights and this whole like welfarist versus like, abolitionist thing, I think that that's really sort of coming to a head right now. And I think that there's a lot of messiness around that I think maybe is a big part of the infighting. Maybe somebody who's more educated on that can, share more about that at some point. But I think oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying my best with streams, and I think maybe putting our egos aside, and I don't know. It's really a hard answer. All I know is that we gotta try. Gotta try.
Okay. And kind of on the same page, David Ciorinas asked, don't you think that sending a message like ban industrial animal farms actually sends the message that small family farms are okay?
This is something that I have been thinking a lot about, and I'm not sure. I do think that I can definitely see the logic of that, but I don't think that inherently fighting against specifically factory farming means that you're endorsing or sending the message that small factory farms are also okay. Like I kind of thought about this from a feminist perspective the other day, and I might be wrong, right? But if I think back to a time where like, or not back to a time, but if I think about like in a domestic violence campaign, right, campaigning against domestic violence towards women, I don't think that that is harmful to like the entire like women's emancipation, or like focusing on women's right to vote. I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on any of this, but I just wonder if there's like a way in which it can be both things. Like I don't think that it necessarily sends the message that small family farms are okay.
Yeah, and I also think like if you ban industrial animal farms, small family farms, there can only be so many, right? Because at some point they become industrial animal farms themselves, right? So it
Yeah.
still does something for it. But yeah, I don't know. I believe that if the question says that saying a message like ban industrial animal farms actually sends the message that family farms are okay, I don't think it does. I do think though it puts a little bit more emphasis on the idea of industrial farming, which most people oppose. But then and most people can use that to their own advantage and saying, well, I oppose industrial farming, I buy my mine from the
Yeah.
butchery or something, which a lot of people here actually say that, by the way. So
Mm-hmm.
hence why every time I pass by a butchery I flip them off. So
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like I don't really have the answer to that. All I know is that like I would imagine if we could immediately ban factory farming overnight, I think that that would ultimately be, a really massively like removing a really big stone, like a really big axe swing, I think, for the majority of people. I also think that like again, like I have a hard time arguing against the idea that, lobbying against subsidizing animal agriculture in the government. Like I'm still figuring out if I can really get myself to believe that those are bad things to be doing, because it's not exactly clear to me what other actions, again, I'm still figuring it out. I'm totally open to being wrong about any of this.
yeah.
I'm really actively learning. But yeah, I think that you can have a very firm message and take actions that don't necessarily send a message that a different bad thing is okay. Sorry for this
No,
like
yeah,
incoherent answer.
I I I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, I think single cause campaigns, they still move the needle in the right direction, right? And it's not necessarily that they send the wrong message. I disagree. I don't think it sends the. I don't think we should always just be focusing on everything or nothing, because then we're just falling into the same nirvana fallacy that some people always fall into, right? So
Yeah, I would imagine you can say we are trying to ban factory farming because all animal use and exploitation is wrong. Banning factory farming, which is like a really significant, way that people view, express this view that animals are commodities, would be a massive blow. I think that you can be firm in your message while still thinking or behaving in that way.
I agree with you. Okay, let's go to my questions. The chat has had a shot at asking questions. That's good. If you have more questions, everybody shoot them up, and maybe we'll look at them later. Okay, so what is one argument against the veganism? What is the one argument that you dislike the most against veganism?
I think it's not so much an argument that I dislike the most. I think it's more like an attitude. I mean, I think like the spiritual mumbo jumbo actually annoys the shit out of me. Like when they're like, my body needed salmon, I'm like, fuck you. Like,
Oh my God. Oh, that's so brilliant.
like, because there's nothing you can say, right? Like, you can't say, well, no, you actually didn't feel better after you ate that salmon, because they actually believe that, right? And they just like somehow believe that I just like, I'm immediately just like, oh my God, like, get me out of this conversation. Like,
Does that trigger you when people speak about spirituality?
well, not really, because I actually do believe that spirituality can be like a legitimate tool, right? Like, I hold some like silly spiritual beliefs that I don't like hold them tightly, right? But it's just like little things that get you through the day, like to add some novelty to your life, right? But like the line I draw is where that starts, where it would hurt somebody else, right? Where it ends in the use and exploitation of somebody else, right? Like that's where it's unacceptable to me. So have your spirituality, just don't use it to justify, terrible actions.
I completely agree with you. It is a very annoying argument, the spirituality one. Yeah, and especially when they use religion to dismiss what they do to animals by saying, "Well, my religion says it's okay." Sure. What is your favorite vegan dish nowadays? Maybe because it's easy to make, maybe because it's delicious, or maybe you just like the nutrition of it.
I mean, it's really not a meal, but I can't stop eating it, and it's specifically the combination of these like spicy like straws. They're from a company called like Spudsy, and I discovered them like a month ago, and they're just crispy. They have like this like almost like cheesy kind of flavor, and they're very spicy, and I love eating that with like a cold apple. Just the combination of like the really spicy, crispy, and then an apple. It's so delicious.
What kind of apple?
I have been going for the Cosmic Crisps lately.
Oh, yes. God, I
Yeah?
missed. They're only in US, I miss Cosmic Crisp so
no.
much.
Oh man. They were invented in the state of Washington by one of the
Really?
universities here.
I'm such a big fan of Cosmic Crisp. Honey Crisp is also good, but Cosmic Crisp is
It's a little better.
it's like the perfect apple, so I get it. It's okay. Wow, I'm excited now. I can hardly wait to get to US and eat those apples. Okay.
Yes.
What is, in your opinion, the worst logical fallacy that most carnists make?
I mean, I think appeal to nature is just, again, it's one of those where it's just, I feel like it's been debunked so many times. It feels so obvious to me that I feel like I'm going back to kindergarten to try and explain it when I have to. Like,
Wait, I mean, wow, the fact that you knew about the appeal to nature in kindergarten.
Kindergarten. Not that. No, it just feels like it. It feels like something that
I'm just being a dick
about.
right here. No, I get it. I was
Okay,
teasing
okay.
you. Yeah, okay. No,
Got
you're
it.
right. You're right. That's cool. Actually, that's also mine. So I agree with you. The appeal to nature is such a detrimental.
Yeah.
And I remember one thing that I wanted to challenge you on.
Mm-hmm.
What was your take? And this is just gonna split the whole chat again. Like, what is your take on during COVID, when the government asked people to, well, not asked, but rather demanded that people do mandatory vaccinations in regards to body autonomy and all this?
Yeah, I think that. So for me, the answer was pretty easy. Like, I was pro-vaccination. I still am pro-vaccination. I do think that there's a very, like, I mean, I don't know. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I think the government didn't even it's been a while, and I didn't even like look into it that much at the time. Was it mandated, or was
If
I
you
think
wanted
it
to be
was
in
to an
certain
extent.
places,
In
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I it's a hard question. I don't have a great answer for it. Again, I'm just like pro vaccination. I can't even really imagine. I can't even get into the headspace really of being anti vaccination when you just know the amount of harm that you're inflicting on others as a result of being anti vaccination. I just can't really empathize with that headspace. It just feels so selfish to me that, like, on one hand, I can understand the argument, but on the other hand, I think it's like the fact that it had to be mandated is like a symptom of a larger problem in a way, maybe.
Yeah, that is 100% true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I also am like, I don't know, like I believe in body autonomy, but in this
Mm-hmm.
case, somehow I don't. I don't know. It's weird, right? Because in a sense, yeah, you should still have body autonomy and to decide whether you want to take a vaccine or not. But then again, the vaccine isn't for you mostly. It's
Yeah,
for everybody else around you. So
exactly. Exactly. And I just don't know why that was like challenging for people to grasp.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Damn it. We agree on everything. Okay.
What can we say, you know?
Yeah. Okay. If you could make it so that nobody on earth would make a fallacy,
Mm-hmm.
which one would you choose? Like you would just at the snap of a finger, that fallacy, nobody ever makes that fallacy again.
Ooh. I feel like I want to go back to the appeal to nature one just because people find too much comfort in it, I think.
Okay.
I think that
Okay.
that one would. What about you? Which one's yours?
I think I was tempted also to say appeal to nature thing, but I think there are maybe a bit more general ones, which kind of, I mean, nothing comes to mind right now, but I think if I Google the most common logical fallacies, you definitely, let me see, because I am curious now, most common logical fallacies. So, ad hominem is also a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, straw manning is a good one. Um, yeah, but I mean, it's annoying. It's annoying that as an animal rights activist, we suffer a lot of ad hominems. But I don't know if that would be my main. I think also the appeal to nature is probably the most detrimental to in my book also. So, and not just for veganism, but for the whole society. Really, it's
Mm-hmm.
just a fallacy that needs to die.
Agreed.
Um, Okay, if you could pick one person in the world to make vegan, who would you choose? They could be a public figure,
Mm.
they could be a friend, they could be a family.
Interesting. Because like my first answer was just my default answer, which would be Paul McCartney, but he's whatever. That's not that important to me. My second answer is actually two people, which would be Rhett and Link. But then I was like, no, we got to be strategic about this. And so my first answer was somebody like a political figure. And then I thought Bill Gates, and I was like, no, he's not that influential. And then I thought maybe Kamala Harris. And then I thought, no, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Okay, so Donald Trump would be your go-to, but don't you think that
Imagine.
then
Yeah, then I know it doesn't work that well either. I just thought it would be like I was amused by the idea of Donald Trump suddenly like at his next rally being like, hey, have you heard of animal exploitation?" Like, like, and my sort of thought was that he has so many followers who are just sort of like willing to do whatever that he'd probably have a very high conversion rate, frankly. Um, but I don't know.
yeah, I see. I mean, for me it was Mr. Beast because I felt like he has a lot of
Oh,
followers.
okay, yeah, same
But not
idea, different
but
execution.
he's kind of a piece of shit, so I don't want him.
He is,
I don't know,
yeah.
yeah. I guess you know about the whole scandals that he's been going through, and
A bit. I've heard. I don't. Oh man, I just like my eyes roll so hard whenever I see him. It's hard to stay engaged with his stuff.
I get it. I get it. Don't worry about it. And yeah, I'm guessing. I think somebody mentioned Taylor Swift. Yeah, Oluwale mentioned Taylor Swift.
Okay.
That's
That's a very good one. Yep.
that's a very
I
good
think
one.
that
I
has to
agree.
be the answer.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I think like nobody has something against Taylor Swift. More people, a lot of people idolize her. A lot of people like her, and the people that don't like her. Oh, sorry, the people that don't like her. Damn it. The people that don't like her are usually just they're just even if they're indifferent to her, they still kind of Like she doesn't have enemies. That's how I feel. Like I don't feel like Taylor Swift has enemies, but maybe I don't know enough about her. Although I listen to
Yeah.
some of her music.
No. Interesting.
Uh, wait, wait. People keep saying Pierce Morgan. Yeah, Ronaldo.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway,
Mm,
okay.
yeah.
And my final question:
Yes.
how do you imagine a vegan world would look like? Or I always find like this question is difficult to explain what I mean, and you can answer it in so many ways. Like how I like to imagine it is if you could freeze yourself and wake up in the future and everybody's vegan.
Okay.
What is the first thing you want to know, or what is the first thing you want to do, or what like yeah, what is the first thing you're curious about more than anything, or that's why I'm yeah, how do
I
you
th-
envision a vegan world?
I think that. Oh, that's a really interesting question. Like, I mean, I guess it would depend on how far in the future is everyone I know dead. Like, am I the only one who got frozen and like sent into the future?
Let's
I
assume so, yes.
oh my gosh. Oh,
So that we leave all emotions aside, for
oh,
no other
okay.
reason.
I think that I would just feel like a sense of. Mm, I'd have to figure out what to do with my life. I think I would feel like I'd need to complete. I think there would be a really significant reorienting that would need to happen.
I mean, you still do
Um,
procreative ethics, right?
I
So
mean, I guess we don't know what's happened in this future, though, right?
yeah,
Like it
yeah.
could, yeah, maybe I would just switch fully over to procreative ethics, and if that hasn't also been taken care of, right? But yeah, I guess that would be the answer then. Figure out what the state of procreative ethics is, and then proceed from there.
Okay, but the reason why I mentioned this example, by the way, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to ask you what you would do, but more like how would
Mm-hmm.
you envision the world? And the
Yeah.
reason why I
Okay.
posed this question was, for example, because for me, one of the first thing is I would like to see a supermarket, like just genuinely. I
Huh.
am curious to see what
Yeah.
a vegan, like well, there are some completely vegan supermarkets, but I'm just curious about how people behave in a supermarket, how people are, like how what happens where are all the farms or stuff like that. Like I just genuinely want to know how the world is
Yeah.
in all the regards that we're not vegan. So I'm curious in that manner, how do you see that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the supermarket is definitely very interesting. I'm sure that I would enjoy eating a lot. Um, yeah, I think that the farms. Well, I think I'd also be curious about some of like the trickle down effects of that. Like, did the rejection of animal exploitation, like what kind of effects did that have on society as a whole? Did like this
It's a
realization
good
lead to
one.
other realizations? Um, like I'd be curious, yeah, like what happened to certain species, like domesticated animals, like are there still like dogs who like roam in the wilds? Did we go for
Yeah,
your method of no spaying and neutering, and they've just become kind of like species who live in the wild? I guess that would also be something I'm interested in.
interesting. That's
Yeah, I'd have to think more about it though. I haven't really thought about that one that much.
yeah, I mean, I guess I just it's kind of like on a positive idea for me, but that's also one thing that I would be curious. You're right. Well, how would a vegan world impact the conflicts, how people perceive other minority groups and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I don't know, I feel like veganism is the ultimate discrimination form, which maybe if we end that, all other discrimination forms just fall on their back.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you, Tofudo, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I also had a lot of people don't know I had prepared the game for us to play, but yeah, I guess the conversation kind of was. Well, I just enjoyed the conversation as it was, and maybe we'll play the game another time.
Definitely.
If you are here for Tofu Dog, subscribe to me. If you are here for me, subscribe to Tofu Dog, please.
Thank you.
Uh,
I'd love to have you.
and I like to end the streams with trying to incentivize people to go and do some activism, to go and speak up for animals. And lately, I'm trying to ask my guests to do that for me, because I always do it, and I feel like if you feel comfortable and you want to tell people in the chat to go and do activism, like, what would you tell the vegans? How would you tell them? Approach them and incentivize them.
How would I incentivize them? I guess that it's hard because, like I said sort of earlier, it sort of just followed from becoming more educated for me. So I think that what I would recommend is I would actually recommend doing some reading. Like, I would recommend looking into some of those like initial writings about veganism, educating yourself on some of the differences. And I think like we can become a bit complacent, like, oh, like, of course I'm for animals, right? And I'm already doing this thing, which is veganism. But I think that becoming even more educated and like weaponizing like yourself and just like really coming down to a very fine point is really empowering in understanding how you want to like exist in the activism spaces. And when you're really clear on what your message is and what your purpose is, I think like the activism will follow kind of naturally from that. And then also you just have to think about, what kind of world you want to live in. Like selfishly, of course, like do you want to live in a world in which animals are exploited? And like for me, the answer is absolutely not. I won't accept that reality, so we have to change that reality for ourselves. And we need everybody. There's this I'm gonna bring up the book again. There's this thing about like cascading changes, right? So that's kind of like where it ends, and like you never know where. The analogy was throwing cigarette butts out a window to a forest, right? It's like you can throw 100 out and they won't hit the right thing, but when you hit the right spot in the forest, like it ignites and nobody knows where that spot is. And we really need people to be, just throwing all the cigarette butts at every part of the forest to see if we can get it to alight. So that's a terrible analogy, but yeah, we really do need everybody.
That's a pretty good analogy.
It is, but
a very good analogy. Yeah.
The smoking is more what I meant was the bad part. I don't recommend littering or smoking, but I think analogy-wise, it does kind of work. So, yeah, you make more of a difference than you think you do as an individual, and you can always don't be afraid. I think people will appreciate you for what you're doing, and the animals need you, and you'll feel better about yourself too. Selfishly, again, like it's a confidence booster. I think like I feel like I've definitely standing up for what I believe in, like to other people, has been extremely like I've just become a more well-rounded, self-confident person. And maybe if that selfish reason is motivating, honestly, do it. It's awesome. We need you. I hope I did a good job. I'm really bad at motivational speeches.
I think you did great. No, you did absolutely great. Okay. Everybody, just go out there and do what she said. She's right. You don't know what's going to spark a flame. You don't know who you're going to talk to is going to become the next Earthling Ed, the next Gary Rovsky, whatever it is. Somebody who's going to be turning the world vegan. It may just be that one conversation that you have with that one person. So
we don't know what it's going to be.
Exactly. So I really like that idea. Thank you so much again, Tofudo, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ulf, for the donation. And thank you, everybody in the chat for being here and, I don't know, chatting. And yeah, being cool. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you have any more comments, drop them below. Subscribe to me. Subscribe to Tofu Dog. Let me just put in your whole channel there so that people. I think you should have it linked also in the title, but I'll just drop.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, there's other ways that I also believe that the belief that animals shouldn't be used and exploited also translates to humans, and I'm happy to discuss that more also in the comment section. I'm planning on making a video, but it's a very precarious topic, so I'm trying to do it justice. So I would just invite people to be curious and thoughtful, and feel free to ask me all of those questions. I love talking about it, and I'd love to help out people who have thoughts and questions. And thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely speaking with you, and I really admire what you do. And yeah, it's been a delight.
Same. Yeah, I mean, I think you're building an awesome community. I think you're doing a great job when you approach people on the street, and it's always so interesting to watch your videos. So
thank you so much.
And I think don't like if I could give you some advice, I think trust yourself, because I think you're one of those activists that's going to be you're always an excellent activist regardless. I think if you just follow yourself, you're doing great. And I mean,
Thank you.
this idea of reading more about it, I never really understood the value in it, but I think you got me to understand the value in this stream. So I actually want to read this book called How Minds Change, which I wrote down. So
there's an audiobook too. I mean, when you think about it, books are like, if you choose the right ones, there's bad books just like there's bad everything else, but it's somebody who's, if you choose the right one, an expert on a topic who has spent years and years concentrating their knowledge into the most easily understandable way. It is such an amazing way to learn more about the world. Like even just reading fiction, I recommend it. Just you can really learn so much. I can't recommend reading enough. I personally need to do more too, but yeah.
Same. Okay, well, have a good one, everybody. Read, do activism, and follow Tofu Dog. Don't be dicks. Come on, just go there. Everybody now, just go there now. Don't
Stardew Valley on Friday.
Stardew Valley on Friday,
Be
and
there.
we all know how fun Stardew Valley is. I mean, that actually is very fun, by the way. I don't know why it's fun. Like I'm sorry, when I'm tired, I just my tone is always weird. So everybody, okay, follow Tofu Dog. No excuses. If everybody who's here in the chat doesn't go and follow Tofu Dog, I don't know, something. You get cursed by us.
Yeah.
That's just
Tofu will never taste good to you again. Just
Tofu will. Oh my, that's such a big curse.
That would be evil.
Tofu will. Yeah, tofu will never taste good for you again.
Horrible. Well, thank you again, and yeah, I'm looking forward to maybe playing a game sometime or having a follow-up or whatever.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.